Our story begins with the demon dragon telling our protagonist Min Siwoo that 100 years ago, a foreign star fell into the demon realm, and its wielder toyed with the realm as he pleased using its strange power. However, his reign had now come to an end. Siwoo coughed up blood while clutching his stomach, which was pouring blood. The dragon then asked him what his wish was and what he desired to achieve, even beyond the demon dragon himself. Struggling to speak, Siwoo stammered that he wanted to go home, that he was going back. The dragon remarked that for someone who risked his life to challenge him, such a wish was quite trivial. Even though it was an impossible desire, Siwoo certainly knew exactly where to go. The dragon then revealed that the power to return to his home lay within the dimensional orb inside his heart, making Siwoo smile. He then asked the dragon if it knew how much he had suffered to find it, declaring that he had spent an entire 100 years in that cursed foreign world. The dragon raised its sharp claw and told him that, if that was the case, he should be grateful, because his feudal life would end there. However, Siwoo only smiled and responded that he could finally put an end to it. The dragon swung its claw down, but at that moment, Siwoo released a blinding light. The dragon was stunned to see its hand severed and demanded to know what that unsettling power was. It then noticed that Siwoo's wounds were healing at an incredible rate, realizing that this was not mere healing, but true regeneration. Mere seconds later, Siwoo walked closer to the dragon, fully healed, and asked if it would take out his heart itself or if he should rip it out for him. The dragon couldn't believe that Siwoo wasn't just a simple warrior. Before it could process the situation, Siwoo gave it a countdown of 3 seconds, but before he could even reach 2, he plunged his hand through the dragon's chest. The dragon coughed up blood and screamed in agony. Siwoo apologized for moving too fast but said he had already waited long enough. He then tore the dragon's heart out, letting its body collapse lifelessly to the ground. Min Siwoo, a hunter and a healer, had successfully completed his mission. He gazed at the dimensional orb, but a frustrated voice suddenly scoffed, complaining that, after rolling around for 100 years, all he got was a damn dragon's X-balls and that the world's food supply had terrible taste. Siwoo called the voice Pri and told it to shut up, clarifying that it was not X-balls but a dimensional orb. He then tossed the orb into his mouth and consumed it. A massive magic circle appeared beneath him. He smiled, knowing that he was finally going back, to his disciples, to his younger sibling, and to Earth. Moments later, he was transported to Earth. As he slowly opened his eyes, he sat up in shock at his surroundings. Calling out Freeloader, the voice responded by calling him Food Supply, and asked why he was calling, complaining that it was too busy throwing up in his stomach from motion sickness. Siwoo was relieved that Pri had also crossed over safely, but he still called it a disgusting bastard and told it to just get digested already. Pri asked if he was sure about that and warned that the consequences of its digestion would be tremendous. Siwoo told Pri to shut up before he threw up again. He then asked if he was right in assuming this was Earth, surprising Pri, who sarcastically asked if he couldn't even recognize his own home. Siwoo replied that Earth's scenery changed drastically depending on location. As he took in his surroundings, he noticed that the flow of mana felt similar to being inside a gate. He wondered if they were, in fact, inside a gate. Pri then called out to him, commenting that he smelled like a weakling. Alarmed, Siwoo released his mana and panicked, wondering what was wrong with it. Pri then accused him of being a scam all along and dramatically declared that it was breaking up with him. Siwoo cursed loudly and asked if Pri was at it again. Confused, Pri asked what he meant. Siwoo explained that it seemed like a side effect of dimensional travel. Just like when he had flown from Earth to another world 100 years ago, his abilities had been greatly reduced. Frustrated, he realized that, at this rate, his usual condition was only at about 15 or maybe 20%. Pri asks him if he is kidding, saying that his mana is only at 20%, and tells him to recover quickly before he gets kicked out. This pisses him off, and he responds to Pri that it is not such a simple problem. He then begins to walk while telling Pri that last time, it took him decades to fully regain his strength. Pri tells him that taking decades is grounds for contract termination, and that with his tiny amount of mana, he can't use most of his amazing abilities. He tells Pri that it is not like he can't use them at all. He is then surprised when he hears someone running in his direction. The lady, panting in exhaustion and running, curses, realizing that she was so focused on running away that she lost all her teammates and wonders if they are all okay. She questions why the hell there is an orc there when they are still on the lower floors. As the huge orc chases after her, she shouts for help but then trips on a stone and falls to the ground face first. She looks back in horror, thinking that she is going to die. Fortunately, he appears in time and kills the orc simply by using his hand. He tells her that he has something to ask her. He then asks her if this place is Earth, with a huge smile on his face, which confuses and surprises her at the same time. He asks her again if he is right that this place is Korea, to which she stutteringly replies that it is Korea. He asks her what year it is now, and she replies that it is the year 2037 while still struggling to believe that he took down an orc in one hit. He realizes that the moment he was sucked into another dimension was 2027, and figures out that 100 years in the demon realm is only 10 years here. He then asks the lady who the president is right now, and she replies that the current president is Choi Dae-soo. This shocks him, and he asks her if she means the musclehead with one eye, making her even more confused as she wonders who the hell he is and if this is some kind of act. He is pissed that the president is the bastard Choi Dae-soo and asks the lady if South Korea is really that short on talent, making her wonder if this is some kind of regression storyline. He then senses that the mana flow is strange and asks the lady if they are inside a gate, to which she stutteringly replies that they are inside the tutorial tower. He asks her what a tutorial tower is, and she explains that it is a place that suddenly appeared a few years ago, like a gateway for hunters. If a hunter successfully clears it, they can awaken their abilities and even obtain skills. She adds that depending on their awakening rank, they can join a good guild, so everyone's goal is to clear it as quickly as possible. He is surprised upon hearing this and tells her that back in his day, they awakened just fine without that kind of thing. She tells him that it is a story for first-generation hunters, but he just asks her if that means he has to clear the tower if he wants to leave, and how long it usually takes to get out of there. She replies that if he is outstanding, he can finish it in 6 weeks, but normally it would take 8. The record is 3 weeks, set by second-generation prodigy hunter Ryu Ji-hwan. He thinks for a moment, but then a huge tiger walks closer to them, shocking the lady. She knows that it is a troll tiger and stutteringly tells him to run, but he just keeps thinking with his eyes closed and says that 3 weeks is a bit too long. He adds that because of the side effects of dimensional travel, his mana flow and body movements feel sluggish. As the tiger gets closer, the lady loudly excuses herself to get his attention and asks him if they didn't teach him at the academy to always run if he encounters a troll tiger. The tiger then dashes and jumps toward them, but he remains calm, saying that there is no choice and that he will have to give himself a more generous deadline while the lady in front of him screams in fear. He then simply punches the tiger, sending it flying, its teeth falling out, which shocks the lady. He then tells her that 5 days should be enough to finish the tower. Meanwhile, in the Empire Guild, the secretary reports to the Empire Guild leader, Min Si-jun, that someone has exited the tutorial tower. Si-jun responds that it is not bad because he believes it has been about 8 weeks since they entered, but the secretary tells him that they are not one of the original entrants, making him stop writing and ask which batch they are from. The secretary replies that they are not on the entry list and that they are causing a commotion right now. He then gives the documents to him. Si-jun is surprised and cannot believe what he sees when he looks at the picture. Siwoo, his brother. Back in the tutorial tower, Siwoo asks the lady how long she plans on chasing him. The lady was shocked, wondering if it was for real that Siwoo had cleared the tutorial tower in just 5 days while staring at him. He, however, was lost in thought, realizing that fighting definitely helped him recover faster. He estimated that about 25% of his strength had returned. The system voice then announced that the tutorial was complete and that it would begin calculating stats and analyzing skill compatibility. However, it suddenly stated that measurement was impossible, making Siwoo smile. The gate then opened, and he walked toward it. The lady, surprised, stutteringly shouted for him to take her with him, but he simply kept walking forward, thinking that he had finally returned to Seoul. A moment later, on the opposite side of the gate outside the tutorial tower, a crowd of people were talking when a huge man arrived and asked why it was so noisy. One of his subordinates replied that the gate had just opened, but that there seemed to be some kind of problem. The man then noticed the commotion and wondered if they were the ones who had opened the gate. He checked the entry log and noticed a pretty one listed. As the man approached, an employee recognized him as the second squad leader. The employee explained that those people had just come out of the gate, but Siwoo wasn't listed in the entry log. The man frowned, thinking that it didn't make sense. How could a guy who claimed he cleared the tower come out without a single scratch? Then, noticing Siwoo's sharp glare, the man thought he looked like a half-starved parasite and assumed he must have obtained a pretty decent skill. Pushing the employee aside, the man said he would handle it. He then asked Siwoo who the hell he was and why he wasn't on the list. Siwoo simply replied that it was because he didn't enter through the entrance. The man, irritated, shouted back, asking if he had gone in through his mouth and of course came out the other way. He demanded to know how Siwoo had exited through the gate because he knew for a fact that he had entered through the entrance. Siwoo, unfazed, merely replied that it just sort of happened. This response pissed the man off. He yelled that the punk didn't give a damn about his seniors. Pri then muttered that the man must really love talking shit. The man pointed at Siwoo's head, calling him a rookie, and said that just by looking at him, he could tell he had awakened some kind of disguise skill and was playing games. He then warned him that if he didn't want to die, he should cut it out and drop the act. But Siwoo remained quiet, simply glaring at him. This enraged the man further. He angrily asked what was with Siwoo's shit-chewing expression. When Siwoo still didn't respond, the man shouted at him to drop it, asking if he should rip that smug face off himself. Siwoo just smiled and told him to shut his mouth, calling the man a reeking pile of turd, which shocked him. The man furiously shouted, asking if Siwoo had lost his mind. But Siwoo remained calm and asked if the man had just said something about ripping his face off. He then told him to shut up and fight, but advised him to breathe as little as possible because his breath was unbearable. This snapped the man's temper. Enraged, he launched his fist at Siwoo while cursing. Siwoo, still calm, reminded him that he had told him to shut up. Smiling, he looked at the man and remarked that he just didn't listen. Later, Sejun and his secretary were both shocked when they saw men collapsed on the ground. Sejun's secretary loudly asked what the hell had happened there. An employee rushed over and reported that the person they had mentioned earlier for causing a disturbance had gotten into a fight with the guards. The secretary asked where the culprit was, and the employee replied that he had disappeared. Sejun then asked if there was any CCTV footage that had captured the person in detail. The employee quickly pulled up the footage from that time. As they watched, the recording showed the men launching their attack on Siwoo simultaneously. However, Siwoo remained in his position, effortlessly dodging and counterattacking at an incredible speed, taking down every man in front of him in an instant. The employee then explained to them that in just a few seconds, Siwoo had taken down 5 hunters and disappeared. The employee then asked if Siwoo could be a hunter with a stealth skill, considering that he wasn't visible at all. However, Sejun replied no, and told them that Siwoo was just moving fast. This made the employee ask Sejun what he meant by that, but Sejun remained quiet, confirming to himself that it was indeed his big brother, Siwoo. Siwoo looked exactly the same as he did 10 years ago. Sejun called his secretary Yahello and shouted an order for him to issue a wanted notice and mobilize everyone in the Empire Guild to find Siwoo. However, they absolutely must not try to engage Siwoo, only inform him that they were with Min Sejun and bring him in. Yahello replied with a firm yes. Sejun's people then rushed to carry out his orders, leaving him wondering where the hell Siwoo had been all this time, only showing up now. He questioned whether Siwoo had been kidnapped or was on the run, but deep down, Sejun knew there must be a reason. If Siwoo had been in Korea, he would have come to find him already. Sejun then pondered where Siwoo would go first in this situation. Just then, Sejun snapped out of his thoughts when someone appeared in front of him. He immediately recognized the lady as one of the people who had come out of the tutorial tower back then. She told him that she hadn't done anything to escape the tower, rather it was someone else who had gotten them all out. Regardless, they had all awakened and exited together. Sejun responded that he understood and assumed she must have come out earlier than expected, meaning she had likely acquired a decent skill. However, she replied that she wasn't sure if it was good or not yet. At least it was an A-rank skill. This made Sejun think that the final evaluation hadn't been completed yet, but securing her in advance was the better option. He then asked the lady if she would consider signing with the Empire Guild, assuring her that they would match the contract conditions as best as they could. She couldn't believe it, but at the same time, she was excited. She then asked Sejun if he was serious and told him that if he was really offering, it would be an honor for her and her family. At that moment, someone appeared behind Sejun and remarked that, despite calling his guild Empire, his actions were more like those of a gang. Sejun turned around and warned hunter Ryu Ji-hwan to watch what he said, but Ji-hwan teasingly asked if Sejun was offended by his choice of words. Ryu Ji-hwan, an S-rank hunter and the Diamond Guild Master, then commented that Sejun was surprisingly sensitive. Another S-rank hunter and White Lion Guild Master, Choi Sungil, then chimed in, saying that it looked like he had beaten Sejun to it. He assumed everyone had arrived after receiving the association's notice. Sungil added that the entire security team had been wiped out, and asked if this was the work of the unregistered awakened individual the association had mentioned. Ji-hwan knelt down to take a closer look at one of the beaten men and laughed, remarking that Siwoo was quite the flashy fellow, causing that kind of chaos the moment he stepped out. Sungil agreed, and noted that they didn't know who Siwoo was, but they had better find him quickly. Judging by his level of power, he must have awakened a high-tier skill, which meant he had the potential to become elite personnel. Sungil added that he found Siwoo quite tempting. Ji-hwan laughed and asked Sungil if they were saying that whoever found Siwoo first would get to claim him. He also asked if their unconventional methods wouldn't be a problem. However, Sejun remained silent and simply glared at Ji-hwan. Sungil then suggested that they search separately, noting that none of them had time to waste. He proposed that if any of them found the awakened one, they should at least keep each other informed. Sungil then turned to the lady and handed her his business card, telling her to take her time and think it over. He reassured her that with an awakening rank like hers, she would be welcomed anywhere. Ji-hwan shrugged and told Sungil to suit himself, saying that he would let them know if he found Siwoo. However, Sejun responded to Ji-hwan with a cold, "As if I would tell you." Ji-hwan's secretary, Jin-sik, saw him outside and asked if the conversation had gone well, but Ji-hwan simply ordered him to gather all the C-rank and D-rank members from Gyeomgang, form squads, and send them out. Jin-sik asked who they were searching for, to which Ji-hwan smirked and replied, "Min Sejun's damn bloodline." Meanwhile, in some restaurants, Siwoo was holding a big, tender, and juicy fried chicken. Pri tells him in disbelief that as soon as he returns to Earth after 100 years, the first place he visits is just a fried chicken shop. But Siwoo simply tells Pri to try it, and he will understand why he ran there like a dog. Pri shouted that it was insane and that he had wasted his entire life, but when he bit into the fried chicken, Pri shouted, asking what it was, if that fried chicken was made from the Golden Legacy, how it tasted like it, how Siwoo survived 100 years in the demon realm without it, and if he was a psychopath. Siwoo laughed upon hearing Pri's questions and told Pri to shut up because he was restoring his humanity, making Pri agree and shout at him to just hurry up and give him more, but he shouldn't dare eat it all himself because everything that was left was his. A moment later, after he eats his heart out, he walks into the street and Pri asks him where they are heading next. But Siwoo just asks Pri back, where else, and tells him that they are heading home. Later they arrived at the house, and Pri asked if it was his house, to which he replied yes. He then held the gate handle and walked inside the house. He then remembered that in the past, every time he came home, his father asked him if he was home and told him that he was a little late. His mother then asked him if he was hungry and if she should call Sejun so they could eat together, to which his younger self replied yes, and rushed to hug his father with his little brother Sejun, telling their parents that they were home. But all he could see now was a messy home. Inside the house, spider webs and bottles were everywhere. He stared inside the house and sat down while putting his hands inside his pockets. He lay down, frustrated that, as he expected, he didn't remember his parents' faces. He remembers that people say forgetting is a gift from the gods, but for him, it was a curse. He was inside the demon realm for 100 years, enduring endless battles on a blood-soaked, unfamiliar planet. His human senses were dulling, his body frozen in time, and his self was eroding away. During that horrifyingly long period, he clung desperately to memory, fearing that the curse of forgetfulness would consume him, the memories of his younger sibling, the memories of his disciples. And so, his memories never became mere recollections. Instead, they turned into obsession and regret. But it was okay for him because, thanks to them, he survived for 100 years. Pri tells him that his house feels lonely, so the place they lived in the demon realm feels warmer. He is glad for Pri as well, and tells Pri that there wasn't any fried chicken in the demon realm, which Pri agrees with and tells him that he can't argue with that. He then tells Pri that he was only planning to take a quick look around there anyway, so they should go, and it was about time they started looking for the others. He then wonders if everyone has been doing well for the past 10 years and hopes that Sejun is also doing fine. Suddenly someone shouts at him that he found him and that it was a pain in the ass finding him. More men then appeared around him and surrounded him. The man then asks him if he is right, that he was the little brat who caused a mess at the top exit, and if he has any idea how much they struggled to find him. The man then introduces himself as Bayon Hawkman, a C-rank hunter from Diamond. But Siwoo just asks Hawkman back, so what? And if they want him to console them or something. Hawkman asks him if he didn't hear him and reminds him that they are from the Diamond Guild. But Siwoo just tells Hawkman that he doesn't care even if they are from Diamond or whatever and asks them what they want. Hawkman laughs upon hearing him and tells his team that Siwoo still doesn't get the situation. Hawkman then asks him if he wants him to make him crawl instead of walk. But Siwoo just replies that he thinks walking on all fours would suit his ugly mug better and asks if gorillas are becoming hunters these days. He then says that the world must be a great place now, making Hawkman pissed. Hawkman then activated his power while shouting that the bastard was hopeless and that they would have to take care of Siwoo before bringing him in. Hawkman then jumped down and launched his fist with Knuckles behind him, but Siwoo didn't move and let Hawkman punch him, causing him to slam into the wall. Hawkman then teasingly asked who Siwoo was calling a gorilla. The Diamond members told Hawkman that he had knocked Siwoo out before he could even take his hands out of his pockets and urged him to hit him more. But Siwoo remained calm, lying on the ground, staring at the system in front of him, which displayed that his skill was Lightning Flash, rank C, with the effect of temporarily increasing movement speed by more than twice. If the body and stamina could endure it, the user could move even faster. He asked Pri what he thought and if he wanted to try it. Pri replied that it was the first skill he had consumed since arriving on Earth, and that he wanted to taste it. Siwoo then stood up, replying okay, which confused Hawkman. Hawkman was about to speak to him, but before he could, Siwoo appeared behind him in an instant. Before Hawkman could ask how the hell he did it, Siwoo slammed him into the ground, face first, making Hawkman scream in pain and shocking the other members of Diamond. A minute of silence spread around them before Siwoo raised his hand, calling Pri a predator and telling him to eat up. A dark magic circle then appeared beneath them, and Pri successfully extracted Hawkman's skill, Lightning Flash. Siwoo was surprised that it worked on Earth too. Pri told him that stealing skills was nice, but it didn't taste as good as fried chicken. Hawkman's members, seeing him hopeless on the ground, were enraged and all rushed to attack in anger. Siwoo calmly told Pri that they should try out the skill they had just acquired, to which Pri replied that he understood. Siwoo then used Lightning Flash to attack the swarm of men around him. One of the men managed to get close and launched his sword at Siwoo, but he didn't move and simply kneed the man in the stomach. He then saw that the man's skill was Vital Strike, ranked C+, with the effect that, when activated, the body would automatically react to strike an opponent's weak point, more effective when wielding a weapon. Siwoo told the man that his blade was all worn out and lectured him that a swordsman should at least sharpen their weapon. He then dashes at them, wielding the knife, but just before he can stab one of them in the neck, Siwoo stops when someone calls out to him. He peeked back and was surprised to see Sejun behind him. Sejun called out to him with tears in his eyes, but Siwoo remained in shock until he finally managed to call Sejun's name. 20 years ago, when the gates opened on peaceful Earth, the world fell into chaos. Monsters rampaged inside the gates, and the emergence of the first generation of awakened individuals, who manifested abilities alongside the gates, marked an era of savagery where there were no policies or laws to handle the situation, and everyone was inexperienced. In such a chaotic world, Siwoo and Sejun, who had lost their parents early, had to survive somehow. Siwoo, a first-generation awakened, quit school to become a hunter in order to raise Sejun, who was still just a brat. At that time, Sejun asked Siwoo if he wasn't going to school today, and Siwoo replied that he was not going to school anymore because he was going to work. Sejun sadly asked if it was because of him, but Siwoo patted his head and explained that it wasn't. He was just terrible at studying, so he decided on his career path early. Sejun then asked Siwoo when he would be back and if he would be late, but Siwoo simply told him not to worry because he would return soon. Back in the present, Siwoo is at Sejun's house and tells him that his house is amazing. He then excitedly looks around and asks Sejun if that is the Han River and if he bought everything himself without any loans. He proudly tells Sejun that he has made it, but Sejun simply responds that it's nothing and that he earned the money using the skills Siwoo taught him. Sejun also tells him that he bought the house so they could live together, meaning there is a room for him too. However, Sejun still feels like everything doesn't seem real and wonders if it is really his brother, the person who couldn't be found no matter what, but suddenly appeared after 10 years. Siwoo is amazed to hear that he has a room there too and tells Sejun that raising a younger brother sounds fun now and that he has been through a lot. This makes Sejun clench his teeth to stop his tears from falling. Looking around, Sejun tells him that he was the one who went through all the hardships, so seeing him joke around like this makes him feel like he really is his brother. Sejun then asks if Siwoo knows how long he had been looking for him and where on earth he had been all this time. Siwoo approaches Sejun, pats his head, and tells him they should sit down because he has 100 years worth of stories to tell. Hours later, after finishing a few cans of beer and snacks, Sejun asks him if he got this right. To sum everything up, 10 years ago, the moment Siwoo defeated the fourth Demon King, he was transported to another dimension by the artifact the Demon King possessed. In the other dimension, he met a being called Predator who could extract other skills, and Siwoo grew stronger using that ability for 100 years while searching for a dragon with dimensional magic. Eventually, he reached the Dragon King, defeated it, and used the dimensional orb in its heart to return to Earth. Predator then tells him that long legs are delicious, which makes Siwoo remember to tell Sejun that Predator also came to Earth with him and is now inside his body. Horrified, Sejun asks if it is like possession, but Siwoo replies that it's more like a parasite, prompting Pri to angrily ask if he wants to shit blood. Siwoo tells Sejun not to take it too seriously. He knows it sounds like nonsense, but Sejun should trust that his big brother isn't crazy. Sejun responds that he believes him because it's him saying it, and besides, they don't live in a world where such things sound completely absurd anymore. It's just hard to picture right away. Sejun then tells him that it's enough that he's back now, to which Siwoo agrees and tells Sejun that it's his turn now. He then asks Sejun what the hell happened in the country over the past 10 years that allowed that bastard Daesu to become president. Sejun explains that after Siwoo disappeared, Daesu shamelessly took credit for defeating the fourth Demon King. He then rose to the presidency with the title God of War, the greatest first-generation hunter, and fabricated public support. Sejun adds that despite all of it, Daesu continues to create policies that disadvantage their guild at every turn. Frustrated, Sejun then angrily says that he wonders what Daesu will do once he finds out that his only rival, Siwoo, has returned. He tells Sejun that Daesu's intentions are obvious and that Daesu being the only SS rank hunter in South Korea is a joke. He then asks Sejun if the ones called Diamond who attacked him at their house earlier are Daesu's lackeys. Sejun replies no because Daesu's guild is Immeasurable Legion and explains to him that there are currently 7 major guilds representing South Korea, collectively called the Heptagram, which consists of Diamond, Immeasurable Legion, White Lion, Warrior King, Azure Blossom, Frost Soul, and their own guild, Empire. Sejun adds that among them, Diamond is the guild of Ryu Ji-hwan, a second-generation hunter, and assures him that he will handle today's incident himself, making Siwoo think that his younger brother has become so tough in 10 years. He then asks Sejun about his disciples, which surprises Sejun, who tells him that they have all gone their separate ways and that it has been a while since they last contacted each other. Sejun adds that Xiaolong returned to his hometown, and Kang Yeonhwa joined Daesu. Siwoo finds that a bit unexpected and asks about Minjun, to which Sejun replies that Minjun was murdered. Siwoo is shocked and can't believe that Minjun is dead. He asks Sejun who killed him, but Sejun replies that the body disappeared, so they couldn't identify the culprit. The only ones who could kill a hunter were other hunters or unregistered awakened individuals, so at the time, HMCS was involved in the investigation, but there were no leads. Siwoo clenches his fist in anger and asks Sejun what HMCS is. Sejun replies that it stands for Hunter Management and Control Section, an international agency that deals with hunter-related crimes on the front lines. Sejun also tells him that HMCS has the authority to investigate and arrest all awakened criminals. In simple terms, they are the hunter police. Siwoo asks Sejun if he happens to have any connections there. Sejun replies that he does and asks if Siwoo is really planning to go there. Sejun then tells him that if he needs information, it's better to use their guild's intelligence team because it's dangerous to go to such a harsh place for no reason. However, Siwoo replies that it's fine and that he needs more than just information. Sejun tells him that what hunters do is combat, But what HMCS deals with are crimes like murder, and that it's too early for Siwoo to go to such a place right after coming back. Sejun then reminds him that he just returned, so he should take it easy and regain his combat senses. But Siwoo reminds Sejun that he has been fighting in another dimension for 100 years, and asks what could he possibly not have done in 100 years, making Sejun realize that he had forgotten his brother's nickname. Sejun then agrees with him and tells him that Lee Yeji from Frost Soul is a high-ranking official there, so he will contact her, which Siwoo thanks him for. Sejun knows that Siwoo's face is the same, but he notices that Siwoo's aura has changed, making him wonder what on earth happened in that other dimension. As he is busy scrolling online, he recognizes someone. Siwoo asks him who it is and tells him to show him. Sejun then tells him that it is Hwang Jong-gu, the team leader of HMCS Gangbuk District, and a 1.5 generation hunter. However, Siwoo is confused upon hearing Jong-gu's name, knowing what his real name was. 2 days later, at HMCS headquarters in the Gangbuk team office, Jong-gu furiously storms out of his office, cursing those second-generation hunters in anger. One of the employees asks Jong-gu what's wrong, and Jong-gu replies that the higher-ups sent a newbie parachuting into his team. He rants that it's no wonder they are called the generation that grew up in a greenhouse because their minds are rotten. The employee mentally calls Jong-gu a bastard old man, but outwardly replies that he understands. Jong-gu then furiously shouts that back in his day, it was a lawless land, and the early days of hunters were a world where strength was everything. They went on missions after writing their wills. Jong-gu then asks the employee if he ever told him about the time he almost died in a raid 10 years ago. The employee wants to reply that Jong-gu has told the story about 768 times, but instead, he only says that he thinks he has heard about it. Yet Jong-gu insists that he should listen one more time and begins telling the story. When he was a rookie, he suffered a fatal injury during a mission, and their party was on the verge of losing too much strength, falling into despair. But at that moment, a healer with incredible abilities appeared and saved him with skills like Hua Tuo and... Before Jong-gu can finish his sentence, Siwoo suddenly kicks the door open and shouts, "Byung-gu ya!" Jong-gu and his employee are both shocked, but Siwoo simply asks Jong-gu why he changed his perfectly fine name, saying it's confusing. He then laughingly asks Jong-gu if he remembers him and reminds him that he was his life savior, which shocks Jong-gu, who stutteringly asks if he is really Hunter Min Siwoo. Later, Jong-gu introduces Siwoo to his team as the new recruit joining their Gangbuk team, Hunter Min Siwoo, and tells them that since Siwoo is new, there is a lot he doesn't know about the place. He instructs them to provide any information Siwoo needs immediately and warns them to treat the rookie with proper respect as seniors. A female team member whispers to a male colleague, asking if Jong-gu isn't contradicting himself and what's going on with the mighty team leader Jong-gu. The man simply tells her to stay quiet, adding that from the way their team leader reacted earlier, it seems like Siwoo is no ordinary recruit. Jong-gu then calls out to the woman, Kim Seung, surprising her and making her stutter as she replies. Jong-gu orders her to follow him to the meeting room for a simple briefing for the newcomer. As they leave for the meeting room, the other employees speculate whether a 3-star hunter has joined as a recruit. Later in the meeting room, Jong-gu asks Siwoo if he would like some coffee, mixed or Americano, to which Siwoo replies that he prefers mixed. Jong-gu then presents the HMCS deployment uniform and asks for Siwoo's size. Seung, witnessing her team leader's strange behavior, questions Jong-gu, saying that even though this is a briefing, she hasn't received any materials to go over. She asks what exactly she should be explaining to Siwoo. However, Siwoo interrupts, telling Seung that he wants her to summarize and provide him with data on all the hunters who have been killed over the past 20 years. Seung is shocked, knowing that 20 years worth of data is enormous, and she tells him that they would also have to submit a report to the Hunter Association. Jong-gu, however, shouts at Seung not to make excuses, saying that she has been there long enough to handle that on her own. As Jong-gu hands Siwoo his mixed coffee, he reassures him not to worry because their data manager will handle everything with absolute efficiency. Seung begins to wonder if Jong-gu has changed without her knowing. She then checks her tablet and asks Siwoo if she understands correctly. When he said killed, he meant he was only looking for information on people. Siwoo clarifies that he only needs cases officially recognized as murder by HMCS and a list of currently unidentified hunter murderers. He knows that killing an awakened individual is nearly impossible unless the attacker is also awakened. On top of that, if someone managed to kill Min Jun, a high-rank hunter, it means the culprit is likely a professional. Even if the perpetrator was caught or already dead, if they were awakened, the Hunter Association would have a record. He decides that for now, his priority is to find them. Seung then asks where she should send the requested information, and he replies to send it to his phone for now. Just then, someone knocks and asks Jong-gu if he has a moment. Jong-gu allows the person in, who reports that the police have requested support because a turf war has broken out between gangs with awakened members. Jong-gu questions whether the police shouldn't be able to handle it, as they are probably just low-rank thugs. However, the man tells him that one of the groups involved is Cerberus, causing Jong-gu to become pissed off upon hearing that name again. Siwoo asks what Cerberus is, and Seung replies that they are on a completely different level from regular gangs. They engage in weapons trafficking, contract assassinations, and are even suspected of trafficking hunters, making it difficult for the police to handle them alone. Siwoo frowns at the mention of hunter trafficking and, addressing Junggu by his real name, Byunggu, orders him to take him along. Junggu clears his throat and insists that his name is now Junggu because he changed it. However, Siwoo simply glares at him, making Junggu sigh and give in. He tells Siwoo that if he insists on calling him by his real name, then so be it. But from today, they will go together. Siwoo agrees and stands up, putting on his uniform while remarking that even as a rookie, he should at least go through some training. Later, at the site of the incident, several men lie dead on the floor. Someone scoffs, saying that Warlord Reaper's elite forces aren't a big deal. Kang-ho, a Cerberus member and second-in-command, arrogantly asks if he is right that Warlord Reaper's elite forces are nothing in front of Cerberus's shield, to which his minions immediately agree. Jikin, Cerberus's third-in-command, tells Kang-ho that it's not fair since half of Warlord Reaper's elite force was sliced up by his flesh-cleaving blade. Kang-ho smirks and asks Jikin if he's feeling left out, telling him to beat him in a fight if he wants more recognition. Jikin responds that he should wait because someday he will surpass him. Kang-ho laughs and asks what they would do without him, adding that it was a good thing he quit being a hunter and joined the organization. Kang-ho then remarks that their boss really has an eye for people, which excites his men. One of them eagerly asks if they should start claiming their territory now. Kang-ho grins and replies yes, declaring that from today, this place belongs to Cerberus. Kang-ho was about to order his men to turn everything upside down when something exploded behind him, sending others flying. Jikin panicked and shouted, asking if there was still a Warlord Reaper left behind. He then approached them, asking which company they worked for and if it was CMYK. Pre told him his memory sucked and that he remembered it as Ham. On the other hand, Jikin asked Kang-ho if he had just killed him and reminded him that messing with HMCS would make things complicated. But Kang-ho simply responded that he didn't care and ordered Jikin to deal with it. They stopped when Siwoo called out to Kang-ho and asked if he was right that he had killed hunters before, judging by the way he spoke. Kang-ho was shocked, and then Siwoo with a menacing smile told Kang-ho to show him what he had. Everyone was stunned to see Siwoo. They noticed that they hadn't seen his face around Gangbuk before and wondered what kind of idiot would walk in there alone. Jikin called Kang-ho, snapping him out of his shock. Kang-ho was sure he had just heard the sound of a skull cracking. He asked Siwoo what he meant and told him that if he wanted a show, they would give him one. Kang-ho then activated his skill, Full Body Armor, rank B. Its effect, when activated, was an invisible full body armor with a duration depending on the caster's mana, increasing physical defense by 30% and magic defense by 10%. Kang-ho then shouted, welcoming Siwoo to the River Styx, and called him a son of a bitch. He rushed forward to attack alongside Jikin and their other members. However, Kang-ho suddenly saw an old man near the river laughing. Confused, he wondered what was going on, knowing that he had just been fighting a second ago. He questioned who the old man across the river was, then recognized him as his grandfather. Kang-ho hesitated, wondering if his grandfather was calling him over or telling him to stay. As he got closer, he tried to call out to his grandfather, only to suddenly wake up with puffy eyes, realizing his teammates were being beaten. Siwoo grabbed Kang-ho by the hair and pulled him up. He told Kang-ho that he was the only one left now, then called for Predator to devour Kang-ho's skill. Predator did so, and commented that Kang-ho's skill was quite delicious. Kang-ho, unable to believe that they had all been taken down by just one guy, stuttered as he asked Siwoo why he was doing this and what he wanted to know. Kang-ho then nervously insisted that they didn't know anything, that they had never killed a hunter because they were just grunts. Siwoo smiled and told Kang-ho that he already knew that. There was no way they, a bunch of small fries, could pull something like that off. Kang-ho, confused, asked why he was doing this. Siwoo replied that he simply wanted to check the skill level of today's awakened criminals. And since they looked like bad news, he figured he might as well take them out preemptively. Junggu suddenly rushed toward him, worriedly asking if he was okay, and informing him that the entire upper floor of the club had been secured. Junggu added that since Siwoo insisted on going alone, he had been really worried. However, his expression changed to pure shock when he saw Cerberus and their entire team lying beaten on the floor. Siwoo casually asked Junggu if they were done too, adding that they took long enough. He then stepped on Kang-ho's head and told Junggu that he had kept one of the bosses alive just in case. Siwoo then asked if he was right to assume that it was fine that he had killed the rest. Junggu sighed and replied that technically, arresting them should be the priority. However, preemptive strikes were allowed if attacked first. Since HMCS operated under international law, they followed standard protocols, meaning that normally, agents were required to wear body cams for justification. Junggu knew that Cerberus was ruthless enough to justify immediate elimination, but he still couldn't believe that Siwoo had wiped them all out with his usual blank expression. He wondered if Siwoo had always been this merciless, even though Siwoo was already known as the Mad Dog. Siwoo casually remarked that he had forgotten about the body cam but reminded Junggu that he was still on his probation period. He then smirked and asked Junggu if he was right in assuming that he would cover for him. Junggu, with no other choice, replied yes, practically crying inside. Siwoo then pointed at the blood on his clothes and asked Junggu if he could see it, insisting that they had hit him first. Junggu stammered, agreeing and saying that he believed him. However, he knew that the blood on Siwoo's clothes belonged to someone else. Without them noticing, one of the Cerberus members had managed to hide under a small table and was making a call. The man reported that Cerberus had been completely annihilated, and that the third in command, Jikin, the one they were ordered to keep an eye on, was dead. The person on the other end of the line demanded that he repeat himself. The caller hesitated before confirming it again. On the other end, Gut, a rank A hunter and a member of Hong Kong's Red Light Guild, narrowed his eyes and asked, "Who died?" The next day, Gut, along with 2 members of his guild, arrives at the airport, where they are greeted by the men assigned to lead them to the designated location. One of the men introduces himself to Gut as Lee Jun-young from the South Korean Hunter Association and offers his condolences. However, Gut simply asks where his brother is. Jun-young replies that the body of the suspect, Jiken, is currently in the Hunter Forensic Department. He then informs Gut that they will accompany him there to confirm the body, complete the necessary procedures, and escort him to his designated accommodation. But Gut, angered by Jun-young referring to his brother as a suspect, demands to know if it is true that the one who killed his brother was from HMCS. Jun-young responds that they cannot provide information on that matter. Gut then asks if it is possible to deviate from the scheduled plans, to which Jun-young replies that it is not allowed. He must remain in his designated accommodation until his pre-approved departure. Jun-young further warns that if Gut leaves without permission, he will be forcibly expelled under international hunter law and will face corresponding disciplinary actions and disadvantages. He then tells them they should proceed to the forensic department, which infuriates Gut even more. Frustrated, Gut asks if they are just telling him to burn incense and leave. He then calls upon his member, Ryu Yenfeng, a B+ rank hunter and a member of the Red Light Guild's Shadow Division. Gut orders Yenfeng to find it, to which Yenfeng responds that he understands. They then follow the South Korean hunter officers, while Gut mutters to Siwoo to wait for him, and swears that he will rip his heart out while he is still alive. A week later, at the Empire's Guild, Siwoo asks Sejun if they have taken everything from Minjun's belongings. Sejun confirms and explains that about 2 days after Minjun was murdered, his entire house was completely cleaned out. Siwoo asks if it is true that a hunter's mana is like a fingerprint, capable of revealing their code, affinity, and rank. Sejun nods, stating that investigators at the time believed the culprit took everything to erase all traces. Since Minjun was an archaeologist, he had tons of research materials at home, yet not a single item was left that could contain mana. Siwoo then asks if Sejun is certain the real culprit was behind it and that it wasn't just a random burglary, which confuses Sejun. Siwoo explains that if they look at the list of stolen items, many of them were valuable. Making such a mess actually increases the chances of leaving behind evidence, which means that if erasing mana traces was the goal, setting the place on fire would have been a much more foolproof method. Sejun asks if Siwoo is suggesting that a random thief took advantage of the empty house after Minjun was killed. Siwoo replies that he checked the crime records in HMCS and found more similar cases than expected. He then starts walking, telling Sejun that they should round up some fences, like black market dealers, and question them. Shocked, Sejun warns that dealing with stolen goods takes time, and that since it's been a year, there's no way Minjun's belongings are still out there. However, Siwoo insists that they won't know until they check for themselves and tells Sejun that he will see him tonight. Later that night, Siwoo finds himself in a black market dealer's place, scratching his head in frustration as he remembers the confident words he had spoken to his younger brother. Irritated, he asks why that tiny country has so many damn thieves, lamenting that his whole week of effort was wasted. Pri tells him that he has good instincts sometimes and suggests that he should let him guide him. He then orders Siwoo to go right, but Siwoo furiously shouts that it's a dead end, calling Pri a useless piece of crap. Pri, unfazed, simply agrees teasingly. Suddenly, he heard a man asking his boss if he had heard the latest rumor. Immediately, he headed toward where the voice was coming from and saw the man telling his boss that HMCS had been cracking down on fences in massive numbers. Just yesterday, the entire Yeongdongpo area had been wiped out. Shocked, the boss responded that it didn't make sense because there had been no reports or warrants. The man, visibly worried, told his boss that HMCS had global jurisdiction over all hunters and even had the authority to execute awakened criminals on the spot. If they resisted those guys with badges, they wouldn't just end up eating prison food, they might become funeral food. But the boss dismissed his concerns, saying that HMCS was just a bunch of government employees and that there was no reason to be scared of nobodies in uniform. He confidently stated that they should just kill them. The man agreed, knowing that top-ranked hunters could make far more money in guilds, and institutions like HMCS didn't have many high rankers. However, he then warned his boss that the guy raiding fences this time wasn't just some average lunatic. Considering that they specialized in stolen hunter goods, he suggested they move their storage before it was too late. As they were walking and talking, Siwoo overheard the mention of stolen hunter goods and asked where the storage was. Both men were shocked and shouted, demanding to know who was there. Siwoo simply told them that they were conducting a warehouse seizure, effective immediately. Terrified, the man told his boss that he believed this was the same HMCS guy who had been taking down fences. The boss immediately contacted his other men, ordering them to get to Zone 2 immediately because of an emergency situation. Siwoo once again demanded to know where the warehouse was. He warned them that he was busy, so if they didn't want to die, they should just tell him. The boss then called a man named Hansen and ordered him to take care of Siwoo, but Hansen hesitated, replying that he wasn't a combat type. Just then, the boss's men arrived at the scene, asking what was going on. Who the hell was that guy, and why was there a cop there? Seeing his reinforcements, the boss grew more confident and asked Siwoo if he even knew where he had walked into. He then told his men that even if Siwoo was HMCS, all they had to do was bury him in concrete and dump him in the sea. Siwoo smirked, activating his power while sarcastically thanking the boss for making it so easy to round them all up in one place. He then turned to Pri and suggested using a skill, saying it had been a while. Pri, however, reminded him that the payment for using a skill was 1 chicken. Siwoo immediately agreed to the deal, and Pri activated his ability, allowing Siwoo to release his skill. A bright, overwhelming energy burst from him, blinding everyone around. He then unleashed a powerful shockwave, attacking all of them at once and causing a massive explosion. Everything around him collapsed, including the men who were now groaning in pain and shock. Siwoo then approached Hansen and asked if he was right in assuming they would now show him where the warehouse was. Hansen, in tears, asked who the hell he was. Siwoo simply smiled and replied, "A lunatic." A moment later, Siwoo was inside the warehouse, surrounded by a swarm of stolen goods. After tying up the men with ropes, he picked up a book while Pri remarked that his instincts had been right. Annoyed, Siwoo told Pri to shut up, claiming it was just a lucky guess. Pri then asked if the book was the one he had been searching for and whether it was food, since it gave off a suspiciously studious vibe. Siwoo confirmed that it was the right book, recognizing it immediately. He was relieved that at least one item had remained. Looking at Minjun's research notes, he noticed a security spell on it. The lock wasn't just an ordinary lock. Examining the padlock more closely, he realized it was a formula that wouldn't open unless activated by the owner's mana. Pri pointed out that the book wouldn't open and asked if Siwoo couldn't read it. Siwoo replied that he didn't care about the book itself, he only needed the mana inside it. He then called Junggu, reporting that he had a dozen awakened criminals tied up and instructing him to come pick them up. He also told Junggu to bring a car because they had somewhere to go. Later, in the combat neutral zone, where forbidden techniques and mysterious abilities were permitted, a marketplace called Black Heaven's Fall bustled with activity. It was a place where all knowledge about abilities was exchanged. Inside one of the houses, a lady sat in front of a deck of cards. She carefully selected one, and amazed by its reading, murmured to herself. The Grand Warlock and one of the 12 leaders of Black Heaven's Fall, Mu Myung, observed that she was about to get an interesting visitor. A moment later, Siwoo arrived at Black Heaven and noticed that not much had changed compared to 10 years ago. Pri then told him that he was a popular guy because everyone was staring at him, noting that their abilities all looked pretty impressive. Pri then added that they should beat someone up and eat, but Siwoo disagreed and explained to Pri that it was a combat neutral zone, so if he started a fight there, it would be a hassle. Someone then stopped him from walking and told him that it had been a while. Myung then told him that she had been waiting for him and invited him inside her house. When they were seated, Myung asked him if it had been 10 years and commented that he hadn't changed one bit, to which he responded that she hadn't changed either. She then asked him what had happened over the past 10 years that he hadn't even sent word, and he replied that it was a long story, but not a very interesting one. He then showed her Minjun's book and told her that he'd like her to extract the mana stored there. She smiled while telling him that he still got straight to the point and agreed with him because it was something she enjoyed. She then asked if she was right in assuming that he remembered how to do it. He then picked up the sharp knife and raised his other hand in the air. He then slashed his palm and let his blood pour into the wine glass. He knew that it was nearly impossible to take mana that had been materialized through abilities or magic and revert it to raw mana itself. As an example, one could pick out the carrots and potatoes from a finished curry, but they couldn't return the dissolved curry powder, water, and other ingredients to their original state before cooking. This meant that making the impossible possible was Myung's ability, mana reversion. It was an illegal medium, a power that defied causality, a result that went against the natural order. Abilities like those were often associated with crimes, so they were regarded with caution by society. Just a few minutes later, Myung told him that it was all done, and, since it had been a while, she had made it extra clean and fresh. She then teased that his blood tasted so good it felt like it danced on her tongue, making Pri comment in disgust that Myung's ability was revolting and not his thing at all. Siwoo thanked her for the compliment and held her wrist while extracting something for her, telling her that it was on the house. He then walked away after obtaining the mana potion, making her ask if he was leaving already, to which he replied that he still had things to do and would come back next time. She smiled, thinking to herself that he was full of mysteries. A moment later on the road, Pri shouted that Black Heaven was creepy and that he didn't want to go back, making Siwoo ask why he was so picky today. But Pri simply told him that he and Myung were both perverts and absolutely depraved. Siwoo asked Pri if he was a pervert just because he made a small cut on his hand, but Pri only asked where they were heading now and said that he wanted to go home. Siwoo replied that they were heading to the Ancient History Research Institute and that it was where Minjun was murdered. He then arrived at the Ancient History Research Institute and walked inside. Pri told him that now that he had power, he just walked in wherever he wanted. He warned him that it was trespassing, but he assured Pri that the building belonged to the Empire Guild and that it was a good thing Sejin had bought and preserved it early on. He then realized that he wasn't the only one struggling to accept Minjun's death. Placing his hand on the floor, Pri asked if he was planning to use it, to which he simply replied that he was. He then activated his mana reminiscence, an unknown rank ability that manifests the emotions experienced by the owner of the mana at that location. However, the completeness of the manifestation depended on the quality and quantity of the mana used as a medium. Mana spread throughout the area, revealing Minjun stopping a man in front of him. He watched the scene unfold, but it was unclear, making him wonder if there was barely any mana left. He then reminded himself that mana reminiscence only showed emotions, not actual memories. He was certain that Minjun had never been a weak hunter. If someone had acted alone and done it so quickly, it meant the culprit was highly skilled. He was then surprised when he saw Minjun look up and speak. Watching his lips closely, he read them as saying that it was a VIP's order. The murderer stared at Minjun for a second before responding with his massive fangs, saying it was someone higher than the VIPs. This made him wonder what the murderer meant by higher than the VIPs. Could Minjun have been part of another organization aside from the research lab? Pri then asked him if he was okay, which confused him. Pri explained that he used to talk about his younger sibling or disciple all the time in the demon realm, and had never forgotten for 100 years. As soon as he arrived on Earth, he searched for the one who had disappeared. And yet, after all this time, he had watched his disciple die right in front of him, and still, he seemed fine. Pri then asked if he had a heart of steel or something. He responded by telling Pri that his vocabulary was improving by the day and asked where he had even learned it. Pri proudly replied that he learned it from Xflix, leaving him speechless. Pri then added that even now, his emotions were surging so much that he was getting motion sickness, yet he showed nothing on the outside. He asked if he was incapable of showing emotion, but he simply replied that he was fine. After 100 years, it was only natural for things to break. Suddenly, the doors of the Ancient History Institute opened, and Yanfeng appeared behind him. He stated that he was right and called him Min Siwu. Yanfeng also asked where he had been wandering all day, saying that he had made him go through a lot of trouble. He added that Siwu should come quietly because there was someone dying to see him. Siwu simply counted and told Yanfeng that he had brought 6 rats with him, yet still acted smug, which surprised Yanfeng. Yanfeng then told him that he was sharp, but that would make things easier. He would give him a choice, so he should pick one. The first choice was to obediently let them tie him up and go with them. The second was to resist and get cut up before they dragged him away. Siwu put his hands together, choosing the first option, and told Yanfeng that it was better than getting cut up. Yanfeng then ordered one of his minions to tie up Siwu, to which the man replied in agreement. He approached with a rope, but before he could get close, Siwu cut him in half with just his hand. Teasingly, he told the others that he actually preferred cutting. Pri shouted that it was a fake-out and called them fools. The remaining men, enraged, rushed at Siwu together. Yanfeng shouted that he would kill him, but they all stopped when someone spoke. A voice stated that it was enough. Gut then activated his skill, furiously telling his team that from this point on, he would handle it. Siwu was his prey. Siwu, unfazed, simply looked at him in amusement and teasingly remarked that he was pretty cool. Gut then asked him if he was Hunter Min Siwu, an HMCS affiliate, and if he was the one who killed his brother Jikin. Pri told him that among all the opponents he had seen so far, Gut was the most decent, and his skills even looked relatively appetizing. Siwu then replied that he didn't know, and asked Gut if people ask for the name of the trash before throwing it out while cleaning, which angered Gut even more. Gut preparing for an attack while calling him a bastard and dashed closer, shouting that he would tear his heart apart. He punched him with his armored fist, but Siwu immediately healed the arm he let Gut hit. Calmly, he told Gut that he wasn't bad, and asked if he was around A rank. Gut, surprised upon seeing him heal, wondered if he was a healer. Enraged, Gut attacked again, calling him an arrogant bastard, but Siwu effortlessly dodged every single one of Gut's attacks. Gut's teammates couldn't believe that Siwu had stopped his attack. The gray-haired man asked the red-haired man why he was just standing there and ordered him to step in, but before he could react, Siwu appeared in front of the gray-haired man and told them not to interfere. He then used his lightning flash skill, striking every man around him at incredible speed, before saying that it had been a while since he had some fun. Yanfeng couldn't believe that a healer could use acceleration skills, and the others questioned what the hell he was while he lifted one of them. Gut noticed that Siwu had seen through all his escape routes and dodged with the least movement necessary. No acceleration-type hunter he had met in the gate had ever shown such precision. He wondered how wide Siwu's vision was, but quickly realized that he was no ordinary opponent. At that rate, he knew he had to go all out immediately. Siwu, still holding the man, looked at Gut and told him that he seemed to be mistaken about something. He then lectured them, stating that if they committed a crime, whether it was their brother or their child, they must be punished. If he had killed them, it only meant they were awakened criminals. He asked what was so unfair about it and whether the ones who should feel wronged weren't the citizens Jikin had harmed. Gut, even angrier, shouted at him not to spout nonsense. He then asked if Siwu was saying all criminals should be killed and shouted that he didn't even know what kind of life his brother had lived. Gut added that Siwoo thought he could just wield authority however he wanted, but Jiken had no choice but to become a criminal to feed him when they were young. Jiken had struggled desperately in his own way to survive. Furious, Gut unleashed all his power, shouting that Siwoo would pay with his life for trampling on Jiken's. He then activated his skill, Langya 1000 Kills, a rank A ability that condensed mana and dispersed it, implementing a simultaneous bombardment that followed the target's movements. Knowing he couldn't dodge it with movement alone, Siwoo told Pri that they should use a skill. Pri, exhausted, complained that Siwoo was overworking him and that his mana was crap right now. He was getting tired. Siwoo promised that this would be the last time for the day, and then Pri could take a break while he handled the rest. Pri reluctantly agreed. Siwoo then activated his Neutralize skill, an unknown rank ability that analyzed the opponent's skill type and mana level, then inputted the enemy's properties into a formula and deployed a magic circle to block it. Thanks to it, he easily dispelled Gut's ultimate skill, leaving Gut stunned in shock. Yanfeng couldn't believe that Siwoo had such a high-tier skill capable of overpowering an A-rank hunter's ability. He thought they should forget about revenge, realizing they were completely outmatched. One of the others asked if they should attack all at once. Before they could act, Siwoo appeared in front of Gut and asked if he really thought everyone who had gone through the same situation as his brother became criminals. He told Gut not to peddle cheap sentimentality because it was outdated, then kicked him in the chest. Gut managed to block in time with his arms, but the force of the kick still sent him flying backward. His teammates grew worried, but Gut shouted at them to stay out of it. Gut then released more power into his hand armor, thinking that Siwoo shouldn't be able to cast such a high-tier skill continuously. If Siwoo was a healer, his endurance should be superior, but his mana would eventually run out. Deciding to end it in close combat, Gut concentrated Langya 1000 Kills into a single strike. He then launched his spinning fist in Siwoo's direction, but Siwoo easily avoided it by jumping. Siwoo grabbed Gut's hair and kneed him in the face while telling him not to use it. Each time Gut attempted to activate his skill again, Siwoo struck him repeatedly, reminding him not to use it. Finally, he punched Gut hard in the face and explained that the building they were in was already shabby enough, asking if Gut would take responsibility if it collapsed. Yet Gut still launched a spinning and powerful strike at him. Once more, Siwoo avoided it. Realizing he couldn't win alone, Gut ordered Yanfeng to restrain Siwoo. Yanfeng bent down, casting his power while asking Gut what he was supposed to do. Gut had told him to stay out of it, yet now he wanted him in. Yanfeng then wrapped a chain around Siwoo and held him tightly. Gut gave it his all and dashed towards Siwoo, shouting that he would blow up his entire body so he couldn't even be healed, calling him his brother's enemy. But Siwoo only teased him, congratulating him because now, he and Jiken were both criminals. He then cast Lifesteal, an SS rank skill that absorbs the life force of all targets within range. A magic circle appeared behind Gut, draining his life within seconds. Yanfeng trembled in fear upon witnessing it and stuttered, asking what the hell that was and whether it was supposed to be a healer's skill. Siwoo got down on the floor, telling Yanfeng that he had never been an ordinary healer to begin with. He didn't heal with mana, he manipulated life force itself. He then proudly declared that he was a necromancer, which was why he could do it. As he approached Yanfeng, the man crawled backward in terror, swearing that he wouldn't resist. Siwoo merely struck Yanfeng on the nape and told him to shut up. He then looked around, asking if everything was cleaned up. Remembering the camera, he wondered if this time it was actually on for real. Looking directly at it, he asked Junggu over the phone if he saw everything and if the footage was showing properly. He then clarified to Junggu that once again, he hadn't attacked first. This was self-defense. Junggu agreed that it was showing properly, but admitted that instead of recording, he had pressed the live button. Right now, 5,897 people were watching. The next day at the office, a man mentioned that the situation was quite troublesome for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He then asked since when HMCS had been live streaming the suppression of awakened criminals. Another man replied that it started about 2 years ago as part of a promotional video initiative by HMCS's International Headquarters for Recruiting Talent. He explained that the process of eliminating criminals was broadcast live through social media, but the project was largely a failure, and HMCS had never produced any decent footage. The first man was amazed to see that a truly incredible talent had now joined HMCS. He then questioned why someone with Siwoo's level of skill was even there. A woman in the room interjected, asking if that was really the issue right now. She emphasized that the important thing was that the person killed in that livestream was Hunter Gut from Hong Kong's Red Light Guild. Based on the footage, HMCS had not violated any current laws. Suddenly they all stopped when someone walked inside. The man greeted them, saying that he had kept them waiting. The president of Seoul, Korea, Choi Dae-soo, then asked them what the issue was. A few days later, at the Empire Guild cafeteria, Sejun asked him if he was listening, which confused him. Sejun reminded him that he had been talking about the live video that had just been released, and asked if he was right in assuming that he wasn't paying attention. Siwoo slipped when he replied that he was eating but immediately corrected himself, insisting that he was listening. Pri shouted that even a dog wouldn't be disturbed while eating and told him to just shut up and eat his pork cutlet. Siwoo then commented to Sejun that the cafeteria was on another level, which was why it was called a major guild. He asked if he could eat lunch there every day from now on, to which Sejun replied yes, but told him to focus on what he was saying. While speaking, Sejun thought that his big brother had strangely become more gluttonous. Sejun then told him that the live broadcast of Hunter Gut's suppression from the Red Light Guild was causing a huge stir. It was a relief that the footage was captured on a shaky body cam, meaning Siwoo's face hadn't been clearly revealed. However, if Daesu realized that he had returned, there was no telling what he might do. Sejun asked if it was true that Siwoo had said last time that his mana still hadn't fully recovered from the side effects of dimensional travel. Considering everything Daesu had done over the past 10 years to erase all traces of him, Sejun concluded that it was best to lie low for now. Siwoo picked up an egg roll, agreed with Sejun, and casually put it in his mouth. He told him that if he was that worried, he would keep a low profile as Sejun suggested, so he should just eat his food now. Sejun, chewing, asked if Siwoo thought he was a kid and reminded him that he was almost 30 years old. Siwoo simply responded that to him, Sejun would always be a snot-nosed kid. Suddenly, someone called out to Sejun. A woman approached, asking what had brought him to the cafeteria for lunch and who he was with. Siwoo recognized her from the tower but couldn't recall her name. She introduced herself as Hunter Shinji-su, a new recruit in their guild, and proudly mentioned that she had even awakened an A-rank skill, all thanks to Siwoo. Sejun then asked if they had gathered for the joint seminar for new hunters today, to which a man replied yes. He introduced himself as Seok Taejin from the Empire Guild and introduced Chu Hamin from the White Lion Guild and Yamato from the Frost Soul Guild. Taejin then told Siwoo that he had heard a lot about him from Sejun and knew he had been making great contributions at HMCS. He said he was looking forward to working with him, to which Siwoo smilingly responded that he felt the same. However, Hamin then asked Siwoo if he was the big-name rookie who had been causing a stir. He mentioned that he had seen the video of Siwoo killing Gut, and noted that Gut had been somewhat of a rival to him. Hamin then said it was such bullshit, shocking Taejin, who stuttered as he asked Hamin what was wrong with him today. Sejun angrily told Hamin that he was being incredibly rude to someone he had just met, and more importantly, inside the Empire Guild. Hamin simply asked if he wasn't even allowed to ask a question and mocked the Empire Guild for being so uptight. Taejin, growing frustrated, asked Hamin if he was out of his mind. Hamin then shouted that the Empire Guild should be more concerned about the disgrace they were bringing to the White Lion Guild. He was sure that White Lion's guild leader Sungil would be quite troubled if he found out about it. Meanwhile, Jisoo and Yamato were already escaping the scene. Hamin then teasingly asked if they were going to be petty and tattle to the higher-ups. He proudly introduced himself as an A+ ranked hunter, the Asura of White Lion, and the direct disciple of Blackwater Lotus, Minjun himself. Siwoo didn't care about Hamin's words, but he was surprised when he heard that Hamin was Minjun's disciple. Hamin pointed at himself confidently and told Sejun that Sungil really liked him. Siwoo stops Hamin from talking, warning him not to make a scene in someone else's house. He told Hamin that if he wanted to confirm something, he should set a time and come find him directly. From the looks of it, Siwoo added, Hamin's master had failed to teach him manners, and he was curious to see how well Minjun had taught him how to fight. Hamin was enraged, wondering how Siwoo dared to insult his master. He thought that if they weren't inside someone else's guild, he would crush Siwoo. Instead, he kicked the table beside him and warned Siwoo to watch his back at night before storming off. Taejin panicked upon hearing this and immediately apologized to Sejun, swearing that he would take care of it. Sejun, however, simply told Taejin that it was fine and to just go. After Taejin left, Sejun reassured Siwoo not to worry about it, saying he would handle Hamin and ensure the White Lion Guild compensated for the property damage, at least a few million won. But Siwoo just smiled and told Sejun not to worry, proudly declaring that he had kept a low profile this time. Then, grinning, he added that since Hamin was his disciple's disciple, he had to cut him some slack. Later, at the HMCS headquarters, a visitor told Sungil that he assumed the matter had been settled. Baek Gunho, the HMCS Korea branch director, also addressed Sungil, saying that the situation could have been handled in writing as usual. Still, it was an honor that Sungil had come all the way to their headquarters in person. Sungil replied that this time, they weren't just there for cooperation. They also owed HMCS an apology. One of their guild members had been extremely rude to HMCS's new recruit. While they had already settled things with the Empire Guild, Sungil believed it was only proper for the person involved to apologize directly. Gunho told Sungil that, as the guild leader of White Lion, this wasn't something he needed to personally apologize for. Besides, there had been no actual physical altercation. However, Gunho then asked if he was right in suspecting that Sungil had come for a scouting opportunity rather than an apology. Sungil was surprised because Gunho had seen right through him. Gunho then firmly stated that Siwoo was an extremely valuable asset to HMCS and was currently quite busy. Right now, he was out on a prison escort mission for an awakened criminal. Sungil sighed, saying it was unfortunate. He then asked if it was true that it was rare for an awakened prison to request support from HMCS. Gunho replied that it was rare, but not unheard of. Until now, large guilds had mostly handled such requests, but things were changing, and no one knew what the future held. Standing up, Sungil acknowledged his point and asked Gunho if he could at least allow Hamin to apologize directly instead of him apologizing on his behalf. Gunho agreed, stating that it was a matter for them to handle. He then said his goodbyes to Sungil. A moment later, back at his office, Sungil knew that Gunho was deliberately keeping Siwoo hidden. However, he wasn't willing to give up on such talent. He called his secretary Seo and ordered him to contact Haman and tell him to prepare for a trip. However, he also instructed Seo to make sure Haman put on his most polite face. Seo acknowledged the order and asked where she should tell Haman to go. Meanwhile, in Incheon, the police chief asked if it was true that HMCS had received a support request from their location and why they hadn't arrived yet. An officer replied that they said they would arrive soon, but the chief angrily questioned why trouble was breaking out after months of peace. Frustrated, he muttered about how criminals could never just get along. With audit season coming up, this was just another headache. One of the officers glanced at the documents for Sherry Volk and recalled that Volk had been arrested quietly. He had assumed Volk would remain compliant, but suddenly, he had gone berserk. Even with mana restraints, Volk had beaten 5 people to a pulp. Volk was a notorious special criminal in the underworld, and authorities had struggled to catch him. Sighing, the chief instructed his officers to quickly transfer Volk to Gangwon-do before he caused any more trouble. The officers then headed to the special prison room to take Sherry Volk out for transfer. Meanwhile, Volk recalled a conversation he had with a man who had told him that Bestia had a message for him. The man asked if Volk was aware that a meeting was happening soon. He then oriented Volk on the organization's plan, stating that they had already set things up inside the prison. If Volk wanted to get out, all he had to do was cause trouble inside. A minute later, Siwoo arrived in Incheon and walked closer, wondering if this was the Incheon awakened prison. A moment later, Haman arrived at the Incheon prison and was shocked to hear that Siwoo and Volk had already left. Frustrated, he cursed, questioning what kind of sloppy prisoner transport this was. He muttered that if it weren't for Seong-il's persistence, he wouldn't even be there. Noticing a blue bus on the road, he asked if that was the transport vehicle. The guard confirmed it was. Haman rushed into his car, grumbling that he was now stuck heading all the way to Gangwon-do. Swearing under his breath, he chased after the bus, vowing to make Sungil pay for his overtime and extra shift allowance. Hours passed, and night had fallen. Siwoo remained on the bus, peacefully drinking his coffee as he escorted Volk during the transfer. Volk called out to him, commenting that it was annoying to watch and asking if he was enjoying his meal all alone. Siwoo simply replied yes. Irritated by his short response, Volk asked if he was a guard at the prison he was being transferred to. Again, Siwoo simply replied no. Suspicious, Volk then asked if he was from some big guild on assignment, since he hadn't seen his face before. He remarked that Siwoo must be pretty confident in his skills to follow him alone after hearing his name. Siwoo, unfazed, asked why and whether Volk was someone important. Volk, growing more agitated, asked if Siwoo had really gotten on this transport without even knowing who he was. He called him a lunatic and said he should at least know why a prisoner was being transferred. Siwoo casually responded that maybe Volk talked too much, which was why they transferred him. Volk cursed at him and proudly stated that he had beaten 5 awakened criminals to a pulp, even while wearing that damn heavy control device. He then asked if Siwoo was still not getting the picture and why he thought an A2 plus ranked awakened criminal was being transported in a regular vehicle, with only some cocky rookie as an escort. Siwoo finished his iced coffee just as Volk told him that he was screwed. Suddenly, the bus exploded and tumbled down the cliff beside the road. It finally came to a stop in front of an old man and a kid, who were waiting nearby, wondering if Volk had survived. The bus door burst open as Volk kicked it down, angrily calling out to the crazy old man. He asked if the old man really had to take him down too. Laughing, the old man told Volk that the Grey Wolf of Bestia wouldn't die from something like that. However, he added that Volk looked more like a little puppy than a wolf because of his collar, which only angered Volk further. Volk threatened the old man, asking if he wanted to lose his teeth. The old man chuckled and told him that he was still the same, still lacking a sense of humor. He then asked if Volk had taken care of the escort. Volk confidently replied yes, assuring them that he had made sure to kick Siwoo right in the temple when the truck took off. He said Siwoo was probably lying somewhere, brain matter spilling like coffee. Turning to the kid, Volk impatiently told him to hurry up and unlock the handcuffs. The kid warned him to stay still if he didn't want to lose his hands, explaining that mana engineering was delicate these days. With ease, the kid broke the handcuffs. Volk sighed in relief, shouting that he had thought he was going to suffocate. The kid, unimpressed, reminded him that he had only been locked up for a few months and was acting like it had been years. Suddenly, Haman appeared, ordering them to freeze. He remarked that he had been wondering why they kept taking sketchy backroads, but now he understood. Volk had made a real mess. Haman then thought to himself that if Siwoo had actually lost to someone like Volk, then he really wasn't much to begin with. He muttered that Sungil seriously had no eye for talent. Glaring at the group, Haman asked if they were some kind of gang and whether they wanted to talk now or after being beaten and dragged away. The kid recognized Haman and asked when he had started trailing them. The old man observed that no other hunters were detected nearby, meaning Haman was alone. Volk smirked and told them it was perfect, because it had been a while since he had a good workout. Haman positioned himself and shouted for them to quit whispering among themselves. He asked again who they were, but Volk simply told him that he didn't even need to know, because he would be dead soon. Volk then transformed into a bear wolf, a rank A+ entity. Haman was surprised to see that Volk was a transcendental awakened, but reminded himself that at the end of the day, if he beat Volk down, he was still just a human. Without hesitation, Haman activated his skill, Asura Diamond Barrage, a rank A ability that rotated internal mana to form an invisible armor around his body. It enhanced his martial arts and engraved the presence of a higher form of combat. Haman then began punching Volk repeatedly. Volk covered himself with his hands, wondering if this was an A-rank speed attack skill. He admitted that if he were fighting alone, it would have been troublesome. On the other hand, Haman was confused. He could feel his hits landing and he was sure he was dealing damage, so why wasn't Volk going down? Volk teasingly asked Haman if he was calling this a welcome back massage, but the kid scoffed, pointing out that for a massage, Volk sure got beat up quite a bit himself. The old man reminded them that backup could arrive at any moment and said they couldn't waste time brawling on the roadside. He then ordered the kid to finish it. The kid nodded and said he would tie Haman up. He then activated his 10-headed snake skill. Haman noticed the attack and tried to run, avoiding the approaching snakes. Mocking the kid, he asked what he thought he was going to do with a toy snake like that. But before he could react further, the snake wrapped around his body, preventing him from moving. Haman was then shocked when Volk appeared in front of him and launched a fist at him, sneering that the white lion wasn't so tough after all. Volk's punch landed squarely in Haman's stomach, making him kneel on the ground, trembling in pain. Volk then teasingly asked if Haman thought getting pampered in a big-name guild made him some kind of big shot. He sneered that in the underworld, Haman was nothing more than a weakling. Haman cursed loudly, shouting that Volk was talking big when it was 3 versus 1. Volk ignored him and kicked him repeatedly, telling him to stop whining. He mocked him, saying that he was the idiot who charged in when he should have waited for backup. The old man then told Volk that they didn't have time and to finish Haman off. Volk nodded, saying that he understood. He sharpened his claws and asked Haman if he had any last words, but assured him that he didn't care about his answer either way. Haman clenched his teeth tightly, knowing that he couldn't go out like this. Fortunately, something suddenly fell in front of Haman, destroying the snakes that bound him in the process. The kid coughed up blood from the impact. Siwoo then stepped forward and asked Haman if he was really giving up before his enemy even landed the finishing blow. He questioned whether this was really how Minjun had trained him. Haman was stunned to see him still alive. Siwoo casually explained that figuring out that little camera had taken him a while. He then asked which one was the live feed and which was the recording. Pri scoffed and asked Siwoo if his eyesight was going bad, telling him to get himself some reading glasses. Folk couldn't believe what he was seeing. He was sure that he had crushed Siwoo's skull. The old man observed that Siwoo hadn't even put up a fight before dying. Even he couldn't sense any flow of mana, which meant it wasn't an ordinary skill. Haman then shouted at Siwoo, telling him that he couldn't handle these guys alone and that he needed to wait for backup. Siwoo ignored him and turned to Volk. He then calmly listed their crimes: attacking a supervising officer, releasing the seals on awakened criminals, damaging a prisoner transport vehicle, attempted murder of a low-ranked hunter, and worst of all, interrupting his sacred coffee time. Under the authority of the HMCS hunters, he hereby declared all 3 of them criminals caught in the act. Effective immediately, they would all be executed on the spot. He then releases his power and tells Haman to watch and learn from down there. He lectures Haman that Asura is not a skill meant for pounding. Placing his fist into his palm, he prepares to demonstrate, but before he can continue, Folk, propelled forward by the old man's power, shouts at him, demanding to know what nonsense he is babbling about. As Volk closes in, he effortlessly lands a punch to Volk's face, sending him flying backward. While doing so, he remarks that Aura is a skill for piercing, then unleashes Asura Black Armored Blood Dance Wave, a technique of unknown rank, shocking Haman as he recognizes it as his master Minjun's technique. He dashes toward the falling Volk and comments that meat needs to be bled properly before it can be tenderized. However, before he can get closer, the old man intervenes, shielding Volk with Thunder Wall Strike, Maharaga, a rank A2+ skill. He halts just in time to avoid the attack. The old man, astonished that he managed to dodge Thunder Wall Strike, finds it difficult to believe. Noticing the old man skillfully double casting in battle, he acknowledges his expertise, remarking that he hasn't wasted his years. Pri then interrupts, demanding to know what that technique is, saying he has never seen a skill like it before and asking if it is something he can eat. He replies with a simple no, and explains that it functions like a single-use scroll, where mana is applied to a spell imprinted by its creator. He adds that it is expensive to produce, making it unattainable for broke hunters. Disappointed, Pri equates it to junk food and promptly loses interest. Haman then calls out his name, demanding to know who he is and how he knows his master's skill. Before he can respond, Haman is forcefully slammed into the ground, the work of the old man. The old man warns him against moving recklessly unless he wants to see the young one crushed under his gravity formation. However, he remains calm, stating that he was wondering what the old man had been doing in the back while his comrades were being beaten. He then asks whether the old man is threatening him. The old man responds that it is not a threat, it is a deal. If they are allowed to leave unharmed, then Haman will also remain safe. He then asserts that he is correct in assuming that the mission was nothing more than an incidental involvement for him, suggesting that if he chooses to walk away, it is not too late. Irritated, he dismisses the notion, stating that he accepted the mission deliberately because he was searching for something. Glancing at Haman, who struggles against his restraints, he asks the old man if he is right in assuming that Haman can recover through sheer willpower. Haman curses loudly in response. The old man, visibly surprised, hesitantly asks whether they are not on the same side. He replies that they abandoned that notion, devouring both the concept and the prison itself. He then questions whether the old man acknowledges that they are hunter-killers from a significant organization. As he moves closer, he points out that the old man possesses multiple high-value artifacts, demonstrates mastery over awakened skills, and wields enough influence to have someone imprisoned, making his suspicions clear. He repeats his question, "Where do they belong?" Rather than answering, the old man intensifies the gravity and counters with his own question. Who is he, and what does he want? Realizing that the old man already understands the truth but still inquires, he mockingly asks whether the old man has left his hearing aid at home. He repeats his demand, "Where do they belong?" As he approaches, the old man attempts to activate another artifact with his wand. Before he can cast it, he releases his shockwave skill and swings his hand downward. His attack strikes the old man's wand, effortlessly shattering it into pieces. The old man jumps backward, wondering if he triggered an overflow by using the same type of electric skill. He knows that such a reaction should be impossible with a normal human's mana density. Staring at his hand, now surrounded by mana, he processes the situation. Pri, noticing his reaction, asks if the food doesn't look a bit more appetizing now. At the same time, he feels about 40% of his mana returning, making him realize that a good warm-up does seem to have an effect. He then tells the old man to stop wasting time, reminding him that he doesn't have much lifespan left to throw away. However, the old man shouts back that he may know one thing, but not the other, and asks if he really thinks they'd just spill that kind of information so easily, even if they are part of an organization. The old man explains that most members of such organizations sign a vow of silence, an oath bound to the signer's mana. Anyone who reveals information about the organization becomes a target for elimination. At that moment, Vok regains consciousness. The old man calls him a dumb bastard, telling him that he's finally come to his senses. Siwoo smirked upon hearing the old man's question about whether they were afraid of dying. He then reveals his healing power, telling them that if that's the case, they shouldn't worry, because after dying 3 or 4 times, they'll get used to it. The old man, alarmed, shouts at Vok to do something, saying he needs to earn his damn keep. Vok responds with an "all right" before dashing toward him, determined to attack again. As he charges, he shouts that even if he dies, he'll rip him apart first. However, before Vok can get close, Haman punches him away. Haman then tells Vok that now the numbers are finally even. Vok, furious, snaps back that Haman should have just stayed down instead of interfering. But Haman simply asks what kind of sad whining that was, then shouts that he can finally go wild. Before the fight can escalate, Siwoo activates his Slicing Wind skill, a powerful wind-based attack that cuts through Vok and the old man at the same time, leaving Haman stunned. Siwoo then grabs the old man by the neck and asks him how it feels. He tells the old man that this is what death feels like. Without hesitation, he heals both the old man and Vok. He then asks the old man how many times he thinks he needs to experience it before answering his question. The old man, struggling to breathe, manages to ask who the hell he is. In response, Siwoo attacks them again, this time nearly killing them, only to heal them once more. Haman, witnessing everything, realizes just how insane it is. Siwoo is healing them right before they die, repeatedly bringing them to the brink of death and back. Haman thinks that if he were in their place, he'd rather just die outright. He begins to wonder just how absurd Siwoo's healing skill truly is. After repeating the cycle of near-death and healing multiple times, Siwoo asks the old man for the 3rd time where they belong. Vok, broken and desperate, begs him to stop and urges the old man to just tell Siwoo everything. The old man, finally giving in, stutters out the name, Bestia. Siwoo smiles upon hearing the answer, while the old man stares at him in shock. He had his doubts, but after witnessing Siwoo's skill firsthand, he is now certain. Siwoo is one of the 3 masters who vanished long ago, the infamous mad dog, Min Siwoo. Siwoo then sits down next to the old man and tells him that now that their lips are loose, it's time to get to the real topic. He conjures an image using his mana and presents it to the old man, asking if they recognize that snake bastard. The assassination organization. Bestia is a small but elite group of hunters specializing in assassination. Led by Crow, they are a force to be reckoned with, both in skill and the sheer number of assignments they complete. The old man had spent years lurking in the shadows as a first-generation hunter, so when he received an offer from such a powerful organization, he had no reason to hesitate. For killers belonging to a group, secrecy about their fellow members is the most basic rule. The moment they take the oath of silence, their life and death are in the hands of the organization. Loyalty is required until their head falls off. That is the law of their world. The old man knows that 15 years have passed since he joined Bestia, and he never once imagined betraying them. He would have sooner bitten his tongue and died. Yet, after experiencing true death multiple times, his lips loosened on their own. Finally breaking his silence, the old man tells Siwoo that the person he is asking about is one of Bestia's members, codenamed Black Mamba. Siwoo then shatters the image of Black Mamba in his palm and finally pieces everything together. They are from the same organization. Siwoo then tells them that before anything else, he has a question. He asks whether they have ever been involved in an assassination request for Hunter Young Min Jun. When they fail to answer, he releases his killing intent, instantly stopping them in their tracks, making them tremble in fear. Volk feels Siwoo's killing intent as if his face is peeling off. He wonders, what the hell is that monster? The old man, struggling under the pressure, finally replies that they were not involved. He explains that although they are called an organization, they are barely more than a group of individuals. Collaboration is rare, and most members don't even know each other's identities or whereabouts. However, there is a reason they came to break Volk out of prison. The old man then explains that they were ordered to free Volk because the organization's biannual meeting is set to take place in a week. Their mission was to break Volk out of prison and attend the meeting together. Bowing his head respectfully, the old man then calls Siwoo Great Master and tells him that, if he wishes, they will reveal everything, the location of the meeting, how to infiltrate it, and will do their utmost to assist him. He then humbly begs Siwoo to accept them as his subordinates. Hamin, outraged, shouts in disbelief, demanding to know what kind of nonsense this is. He then calls Siwoo boss and asks if he is seriously considering taking in criminals. Siwoo, unimpressed, asks Hamin since when he became his boss. Hamin firmly replies that it was the moment he used Asura, pointing out that anyone can tell he is related to Master Min Jun. At the very least, he must be Min Jun's fellow disciple, his senior, or maybe even Min Jun's master himself. Hamin then insists that Siwoo should not take in criminals, offering himself as a disciple instead. He admits that he may have been rude at first, but if Siwoo accepts him, he will become his hands and feet. Siwoo, uninterested, simply tells Hamin to shut up for now. Hamin immediately shuts his mouth tightly, not daring to speak further. Siwoo takes a moment to think. What he truly wants is information about that snake bastard Black Mamba. If he leaves these criminals alone, they'll likely be executed by the organization soon enough. However, if they leak his existence to Bestia first, it would be troublesome. After considering the situation, Siwoo agrees. He tells them that he will accept them as subordinates, shocking Hamin. The old man, relieved, thanks Siwoo and swears to remain loyal and never become a burden. However, Siwoo then states that there is a condition. Even if forced, someone who has betrayed once will betray again. Therefore, they must take the Oath of Mana. Volk, upon hearing this, is shocked. He knows that an Oath of Mana is a binding contract. Breaking it seals the Mana core, rendering the person powerless. He protests, asking why he has to be leashed by another contract. But the old man, whispering, tells Volk to shut up and asks if he wants to die a dozen times again. He opens a magic circle beneath them and orders them to gather mana in their cores and state their names. The old man states that he is Red Ghost, and Volk follows by saying his name as well. Pre laughs and mockingly shouts that the food errand boy has now become his errand boy. He then tells Ghost and Volk that from this moment on, they are his limbs, and the price of their loyalty is his protection. As long as they are under the oath, their lives will be safe. He asks if they understand, to which Ghost responds with obedience while forcefully pushing Volk's head down. Hamin, outraged, shouts and demands to know why he is accepting criminals, but not him. He continues yelling that if he does not accept him as a disciple, he will go straight to the association and report everything. Siwoo glares at him, eyes filled with killing intent, making Hamin stutter and quickly apologize, insisting that he was just joking. He absorbs the contract into himself while confirming with Ghost that the meeting is in 1 week. He then calls for Hamin and tells him that he will take him in as his disciple. Hamin, filled with excitement, asks if he really means it. Siwoo confirms, explaining that they need as many hands as possible for what is coming. He walks away, leaving Hamin behind. Hamin, now smug, teasingly asks Volk and Ghost if they saw that and proudly declares that he is now the direct disciple of that great person. Siwoo reflects on their numbers, knowing that with 4 people it is just enough to cause chaos, but he still needs 1 more person to clean up after them. Days later, Incheon Prison. The chief of Incheon Prison demands to know how this even makes sense, questioning whether the prisoner from the transport vehicle really escaped and if Junggu even understands how dangerous Volk is. Frustration rises as the chief points out that the guards are completely unharmed, which means Volk must have simply run away. He mentions that HMCS has been making waves lately, but now he assumes it was all just hype. Junggu remains silent, remembering Siwoo's words about Volk being too fast to catch. He thinks to himself that if Siwoo is going to lie, he should at least put in more effort, wondering if Siwoo actually believes that simply saying cleanup is enough to fix everything. The chief then questions why the new escort officer has not reported in yet, shouting that discipline is a mess and that the responsibility falls entirely on HMCS. Junggu calmly responds, explaining that typically, 4 to 5 officers escort an awakened prisoner, and in cases involving transfers to higher security prisons, the number increases to 10. However, in this case, he specifically requested only 1 officer, excluding the driver, and the driver was from Incheon Prison itself. The chief, now visibly shaken, stammers while asking what Junggu is implying, before quickly insisting that the responsibility for losing the prisoner still falls on HMCS. Junggu cuts him off, stating that according to what he has heard, The new escort officer has already taken responsibility. He then reveals that just before escaping, the prisoner confessed to bribing the higher-ups in that very prison. The chief, now in shock, asks if it is true that the body cam was off, dismissing it as an obvious lie. Jung-gu stands up as several HMCS members enter the office. He informs the chief that while they cannot take Volk's words at face value, the accusation has now been made. Therefore, HMCS will conduct a full investigation into both the escaped prisoner and the prison itself. He then requests the chief's full cooperation. Later, Jung-gu is stunned when he sees him, but quickly regains his composure and reports that, as instructed, he has handled everything related to the escort mission. He also confirms that an investigation into the assassination group's bribery case has been launched. He looks at Haman, the old man known as Ghost, and Volk, the escaped prisoner from earlier, all standing before him. Before he can ask anything, Siwoo covers his mouth and tells him to shut up and sit down because there is a long story behind this. Once Jung-gu calms down, Siwoo announces that they will begin the mission briefing. He informs them that the following day, they will infiltrate the Bestia Assassin Organization's meeting. He explains that this is a major gathering where 8 top-ranked awakened individuals, specialized in hunting hunters, will convene. He states that the turncoats will now explain the details of the infiltration and instructs Jung-gu and Haman to listen carefully. Jung-gu tells him to wait a minute and questions whether they are really planning to infiltrate an assassination group's meeting with no official backing and with such a small team. He then asks what the objective of the operation is. Siwoo simply responds that the objective is obvious. It is extermination. The next day, inside Bestia's meeting hall, the members were all seated. Wolverine remarked that it was a rare sight, noting that attendance was unusually high today. Tigray, however, pointed out that Red Ghost and Volk were missing, meaning 2 members were absent, and the kid was dead. Wolverine scoffed and called Tigray a fool, explaining that he hadn't even counted the traitors. Hawkeye observed that neither Volk nor Red Ghost seemed like the type to betray the organization, making their absence a surprise. Puma, unfazed, simply stated that if they had turned their backs on Bestia, they might be worth eliminating. Porcupine, visibly angry, cursed Volk, calling him terrible for abandoning their planned trip to XX Land. Swearing vengeance, Porcupine declared that Volk would pay. Grizzly, uninterested in the bickering, told everyone that it was enough and that the decision regarding the traitors' punishment was up to their leader, Boss Crow. Boss Crow, rather than responding immediately, simply asked why. He said he enjoyed all their chatter, encouraging them to continue. Having 3 people absent from a long-awaited meeting was surprising, even for him. After a moment, Boss Crow asked if anyone else had something to say, but the room fell into fearful silence. Amused, Boss Crow then asked if they should settle things with a death match to decide who would deal with the traitors. At this, the room grew even quieter. Black Mamba finally spoke up, stating that Boss Crow's jokes were rarely funny and that she should stop. He added that the traitors' punishment could be scheduled and handled at any time, but the real issue was that they already knew the meeting's time and location. Wolverine, unconcerned, simply asked what 2 nobodies could even do, mocking the idea that they would storm in right now. Suddenly, the system alarm blared, alerting them of an intruder. Unidentified movements had been detected on routes 1 through 5. Boss Crow laughed upon hearing the alert and commented that this was proof of the old saying about speaking things into existence. Grizzly immediately instructed everyone that there were 5 entry points, suggesting that they should each take one. Tigray, irritated, complained that she had even worn new clothing today. The 4 members stood up to deal with the intruders, and Black Mamba reminded them to finish quickly and return. Boss Crow told them that they would see them later. Grizzly, confused, asked if he, Porcupine, and Black Mamba weren't going as well. Black Mamba dismissed the idea, saying he had no interest in dealing with Small Fry. Porcupine, uninterested, pointed out that all the spots were taken anyway, so she would just stay and play a game instead. Boss Crow then turned to Black Mamba, commenting that in hindsight, he should have told them to bring back the intruders' heads for identification. Frustrated, he admitted that his men were too violent. Black Mamba replied that it was already impressive that Boss Crow had managed to put leashes on beasts like them. Meanwhile, Jong-gu, who had been hiding in the ceiling, was watching everything in fear. He thought to himself that he had never even won a 50,001 lottery ticket in his life, and now, somehow, he had hit the worst jackpot imaginable. 30 minutes earlier, outside Bestia's meeting hall, Siwoo and his team arrived at Bestia's headquarters, and Haman immediately noted that they had really found themselves a proper anthill. Ghost informed them that there were 5 entrances, each equipped with intruder detection sensors. However, because the interior layout changed regularly, they couldn't tell where each entrance led inside the facility. Ghost added that the only paths to the outside were those 5 entry points, and ultimately, all paths led to the central meeting hall, where their targets were. The only real difference between them was how long it would take to reach the center. Given that, he told them that they would each take a separate entrance. If they all went through the same one, the targets might escape through another. He then asked Jong-gu if he had brought the radio. Jong-gu confirmed and pulled it out from his bag. He instructed everyone to enter one at a time per entrance and reminded them that since the facility had sensors, they should assume the enemy already knew they were coming and be prepared. He also warned that if they encountered an opponent too strong to handle, they should radio him and hold them off as long as possible. Before stepping forward, he reminded them to report to him immediately upon locating their target, Black Mamba, inside Jonggu's path. At first, everything seemed fine, but not long after Jonggu entered through his designated entrance, his path was blocked. With no other choice, he went for the nearest air duct, crawling through the vents. Somehow, he ended up reaching the central meeting hall first, without encountering a single fight. He wondered if they hadn't even turned on the sensors for that route. Looking around, he quickly realized that every single person in the room was at least A rank or higher. The security seemed sloppy, but with so many open paths leading straight to the meeting hall, it was clearly a setup to kill any intruders the moment they stepped inside. Jonggu deduced that the guards had already left to intercept the intruders, meaning there were now 5 separate fights happening simultaneously. Even if he called for backup, it wouldn't regroup right away. Reaching into his pocket, he grabbed a small marble, wondering if he should start thinning their numbers himself. He threw it down, letting it roll across the floor. Porcupine, noticing it, chased after it and saw that it was just a marble. She absent-mindedly guessed that it had somehow ended up in her pocket earlier. Boss Crow, watching her, casually asked if she was still playing slot machines. Porcupine, teasingly apologizing to Boss Crow, joked that she had hit the jackpot yesterday. She was about to grab the marble when it suddenly exploded. The blast shattered Porcupine into pieces. Boss Crow, however, remained completely calm, still seated, and simply remarked that Porcupine was dead. Black Mamba, unfazed, immediately deduced that a fast little rat had snuck in. Jonggu, still hidden, threw a bomb at them. It hit Black Mamba's hand, and Black Mamba smirked, acknowledging that it was a nice ambush, but stated that he didn't like playing hide-and-seek. Without hesitation, Black Mamba threw the bomb back at the ceiling before it exploded. Fortunately, Jonggu had managed to avoid the blast and jumped down from his hiding spot. He immediately attempted to kick Black Mamba, but Black Mamba blocked it effortlessly and recognized him as a member of HMCS. Jonggu safely landed on the ground but felt frustrated. He had only managed to kill one of them. Even after using a magic grenade designed for anti-terror ops, the remaining members were completely fine. His eyes focused on the one who seemed to be the leader. He noticed that even though Boss Crow wasn't using any visible special skills, he gave off an overwhelming presence. Black Mamba spoke up, saying that he knew Jonggu hadn't come alone. He then asked if the traitors had run to HMCS and spilled everything. Jonggu simply asked him back, what if they did? Black Mamba, unimpressed, replied that he would actually be impressed if they had. He remarked that risking their lives to leave the organization only to join something even more worthless was ridiculous. His words irritated Jonggu, who threw something at him in anger, a set of knives aimed straight at Black Mamba's head. Boss Crow watched and commented that it wasn't a bad move. Black Mamba let the knives graze his face, remaining completely calm, and stated that he had almost forgotten Jonggu's skill was psychokinesis. Jonggu clenched his fists in frustration. He noticed that Black Mamba's skin was incredibly tough and that his regeneration was unnaturally fast. Even though Black Mamba was only reinforcing himself with mana, his speed and durability were insane. Suddenly, Black Mamba dashed forward. Jonggu barely had time to react. Black Mamba, calling the fight a sufficient warm-up, closed the distance in an instant. Jonggu was shocked at Black Mamba's speed and barely managed to cover himself with his arms before impact. The force slammed him into the wall, sending him crashing to the floor in pain. Black Mamba looked down at him and commented that he hadn't planned on leaving handprints on his vital organs, but since he was already bleeding, he guessed he had no choice. He then asked Boss Crow if he could kill Jonggu now. Boss Crow simply replied no, stating that he would figure something out instead. Ignoring his injuries, Jonggu immediately grabbed his radio and reported that he was engaging targets in the central hall. Before he could say anything more, Black Mamba kicked him down again, taunting that he was a little late in calling for help. Black Mamba then smirked and asked who was coming next. The HMCS branch chief? The traitor Red Ghost? The little wolf pup? Or perhaps all of them? At that moment, Ghost, Voke, and Haman appeared behind Black Mamba and launched their attacks together. Their attack caused a small explosion, but unfortunately, Black Mamba managed to jump away just in time to dodge it. He then calmly told them that the ambush was a bit unexpected, and that he couldn't believe they had gotten past Bestia's killers so easily. Black Mamba then turned to Boss Crow, remarking that she must be disappointed. Boss Crow replied that she thought she had picked some useful ones, but hadn't expected them to be that weak. However, Black Mamba suddenly sensed something was off. He observed their injuries and confirmed that there had been a fight, but he doubted they could have taken down Tigre or Grizzly so easily. Without warning, Black Mamba stomped the floor, causing it to shatter. The impact sent a powerful shockwave crawling toward them, breaking apart the ground beneath their feet. Haman rushed forward, calling Black Mamba a murderous bastard, and launched his fist at him, shouting that he was talking way too much. Black Mamba simply grabbed Haman's hand mid-attack and asked if he was Hunter Chu Haman from the White Lion Guild. He then questioned why someone like him was here instead of with HMCS. Before Haman could respond, Black Mamba threw him aside, sending him crashing onto the floor and bouncing hard against the wall. Black Mamba then addressed the group, stating that, no matter how he looked at it, something didn't add up. They didn't act like a unified team. They were just a bunch of misfits thrown together, coming from completely different backgrounds with no apparent reason to be working together. He then asked who was responsible, who had brought them all together. At that moment, one of the gates opened, and Siwoo appeared, dragging a battered Wolverine core along with his other teammates. Furious, Haman asked if Black Mamba was underestimating him, and then shouted at Junggu to get up and get his head straight. Junggu, still dazed, asked Haman how they had arrived so quickly. Haman explained that the moment he heard the radio, he rushed over, or at least, that was what he wanted to say. In reality, he had been fighting an enemy near the entrance when Siwoo suddenly showed up and ordered him to head straight for the center. Haman added that Volk and Ghost had likely been in similar situations. Until Siwoo arrived, they had to keep Black Mamba pinned down. Frustrated, Volk questioned how they were supposed to capture an A+ ranked Awakened without killing him. Ghost chimed in, noting that Black Mamba hadn't even used his abilities yet, and that something was off about the meeting hall. Ghost knew that in terms of speed and attack power, Black Mamba was practically the second strongest in Bestia. However, Black Mamba didn't have high-level detection or tracking skills, meaning he must have set something up in advance, or perhaps Bestia's leader had. Ghost also knew that Boss Crow's abilities remained a complete mystery to them, making it impossible to predict when she would throw in a wild card. Ghost then pulled out his wand and shouted to the others that he would take care of Crow, while they focused on capturing Black Mamba. Volk, who was in the middle of battling Black Mamba, cursed under his breath, frustrated that the dirty work always fell to him. Black Mamba kicked Volk down and with a sigh, asked if anyone was actually going to answer his question. Haman then appeared behind Black Mamba and attacked again, while Ghost chanted a spell, shouting that until their master arrived, no one was leaving. Ghost activated his binding formation, and chains wrapped tightly around both Black Mamba and Boss Crow, who had remained seated, watching the events unfold. Crow asked Ghost if he was really forcing her to fight, but Ghost simply told her to stay still. Escaping from a legendary tier binding formation wouldn't be easy, even for her. Crow, amused, commented that Ghost's new master must have pulled some strings for him, considering all the fancy new tools he had. She then remarked that betraying the organization as easily as flipping a coin was pretty cold. Suddenly, a crow appeared behind Ghost without him noticing. Crow then called out to Porcupine, asking if she had been right. To everyone's shock, the crow transformed into Porcupine and delivered a powerful kick, sending Ghost crashing to the ground. Volk rushed to Ghost in concern, while Junggu, stunned, stammered in disbelief, demanding to know what the hell was happening. He then shouted that Porcupine was definitely dead. The chains disappeared, freeing both Black Mamba and Crow. Black Mamba then told them that any further fighting would be a waste of time. They were all busy people after all. He added that no one knew when reinforcements might arrive, and they still needed to clean up what remained of the fallen organization. Without hesitation, Black Mamba transformed into a Draconian, an A2+ ranked skill, and declared that they would all have to die as soon as possible. Junggu told Haman that he would provide remote support, but Haman simply told him to stay put. His ribs seemed broken, and no matter how much firepower he brought, it wouldn't be enough to pierce Black Mamba's hide. For now, their best option was to run. Black Mamba swung his tail at them, but they managed to jump in time to dodge the attack. Haman attempted to counter while analyzing the situation. From their first clash, he had already suspected that Black Mamba's variant skill resembled Volk's, but the difference in mana density was overwhelming. He also noticed that Black Mamba was controlling the meeting hall as though it were an extension of his own body. In this fight, he was little more than a meat shield. Black Mamba's durability was far superior, leaving him with no option but to buy time. Haman observed that Ghost and Volk were in just as much trouble, meaning reinforcements were unlikely. Frustrated, he cursed under his breath, realizing that he had never been in a situation where he couldn't hold his own before. Black Mamba suddenly launched a punch toward Haman, but before it could land, a knife pierced his hand, halting the attack. However, Black Mamba simply healed himself, shocking Junggu, who had not expected him to be capable of elemental magic as well. Black Mamba rolled his tail around for another sweeping attack, but they managed to jump away just in time once more. Haman shouted to Junggu, warning him about a large stone overhead, but before he could react, Black Mamba appeared beside him and questioned whether he really had time to be worrying about others. Without hesitation, he slammed Haman into the floor. Black Mamba then appeared behind Junggu and remarked that Brightside hunters always made the same mistake. Wrapping his arm around Junggu's neck, he tightened his grip, choking him. He continued, mocking the idea that hunters believed skill ranks and mana levels determined the outcome of battle. Junggu struggled to breathe, but Black Mamba only teased him further, reminding him that they had willingly walked into the enemy's stronghold. He questioned whether they really thought there wouldn't be defenses set up in their own base. As Junggu's vision blurred, he glanced around and saw Crow idly watching while Porcupine attacked Volk, shouting that he was a liar and deserved to die. Black Mamba then revealed that the entire hall's floor was rigged with self-destruction, tracking, and enhancement formations as emergency contingencies. He stated that this was a snake's den, and the moment they had stepped inside, their fate had already been sealed. He advised Junggu to stop struggling and die quietly. However, before he could finish, Black Mamba suddenly sensed an overwhelming killing intent behind him. Acting on instinct, he leaped away, narrowly avoiding an incoming attack. Siwoo then rushed forward at an incredible speed, effortlessly pinning Black Mamba against the wall. Fury burned in his eyes as he finally declared that he had found him. Porcupine dashed toward him, shouting as she demanded to know who the hell he was. However, before she could react, he easily killed her with a thunder-based attack. Vrao, witnessing the scene, was amazed and asked if he had reverse-engineered all the magic circles in that space. He remained silent, merely glaring at Crow, while Pri shouted that it had only been possible because of him, and remarked that Crow was surprisingly slow-witted. Crow clapped her hands, seemingly excited, and commented that the haul had cost billions, yet he had reduced it to scraps in an instant. Black Mamba moved his hands slightly, stating that he was a little surprised by the rude entrance, but that now he finally understood. He then attempted to slash at him, but Siwoo jumped backward just in time to evade the attack. Black Mamba then asked if he was the one responsible for wiping out the killers and gathering those people. Instead of answering directly, he furiously shot back, demanding to know why Black Mamba was calling him the culprit when it had been him all along. Crow, now confused, questioned whether Black Mamba had been the target from the very beginning. She turned to him, asking what kind of mess he had gotten himself into. Black Mamba, however, dismissed the idea, replying that it couldn't be, as he was simply a person who followed orders. But as he processed the situation, realization struck him. His opponent was here for revenge. Acknowledging this, Black Mamba admitted that no matter who he had killed, he wouldn't have left any trace behind, which meant that his adversary was quite an impressive individual. Releasing his magic, Siwoo confirmed that he was indeed here for revenge, but before that, there was something he needed to find out. As he controlled his magic power, the ground beneath them shifted, trapping Black Mamba inside. Crow took a step forward, seemingly about to say something, but Ghost and Voke immediately stopped her. Ghost warned her not to move, explaining that their master had something he wanted to hear. Raising both hands in the air, Crow assured them that she had no intention of interfering. She then inquired about what had happened that made them so loyal and, more importantly, who Siwoo really was, all while watching Siwoo effortlessly overpower Black Mamba. The magic power repeatedly pierced through Black Mamba's thick skin, causing him to curse under his breath. He had never expected the buff magic circle to be reversed and turned into a trap against him. He wondered if Siwoo had used tracking magic, but after observing his skill in battle, he realized that wasn't the case. Instead, Siwoo's attack speed was at a completely different level compared to an ordinary melee hunter. Siwoo launched another attack, sending Black Mamba bouncing off the floor before slamming into the wall. As Black Mamba collapsed onto the ground, his skill deactivated from the pain. Yet, despite his injuries, he let out a laugh and admitted that Siwoo was the first person he had ever met who was like this. Black Mamba cast another spell, stating that he prided himself on knowing everything about high-ranking hunters. He then demanded to know what the hell Siwoo was. As he unleashed his magic towards Siwoo, he also questioned what Siwoo wanted from him. However, Siwoo easily dodged the attack and reappeared above Black Mamba, his foot poised to strike. Siwoo told him that he seemed to be misunderstanding something. Before Black Mamba could react, Siwoo stomped his head down, reminding him that he wasn't the one asking questions, Siwoo was. He then asked if Black Mamba could even feel how much he was holding back. Without waiting for an answer, he repeatedly stomped Black Mamba's head, warning him that if he let loose even a little, he would kill him. Until he permitted otherwise, Black Mamba needed to stay silent and endure. Black Mamba, unable to withstand the relentless assault, began begging for him to stop. Siwoo lifted him up and with a cold tone, reminded him about the VIPs. He then demanded to know who had ordered the hit on Young Min Jun. Black Mamba's eyes widened in shock as he realized that Siwoo was talking about historian Young Min Jun. Black Mamba laughed and questioned how he even knew about it, asking if Min Jun was his associate. However, he was met with a cold order to talk. Siwoo reminded him that he wanted to live. Gripping his hand tightly, Black Mamba stuttered, admitting that he was right and he would tell him. But before he could say more, he suddenly activated his skill, opening his mouth and spitting dark saliva at him while shouting that even if he revealed the truth, his ears would melt before he could even hear it. Letting go, Black Mamba continued laughing, stating that a killer's basic rule was secrecy regarding their clients. However, his laughter faded when he realized his attack had failed. Siwoo's head hadn't melted. Furious, he asked if he had just spat in his face. Siwoo simply healed himself and in a serious tone, asked Black Mamba if this meant he didn't want to talk. He warned that he would make him want to talk. Black Mamba, shocked, struggled to comprehend that his enemy was also a healer. Panicking, Black Mamba called for Crow, but she only apologized, explaining that she was currently surrounded. Seeing no way out, Black Mamba looked at him, stuttering as he finally agreed to talk. As he was midway sentence, he was swiftly cut down. Siwoo, surprised, recognizes it was pandemonium. Crow, watching Black Mamba fall, laughed and snapped her fingers, causing a strong wind to erupt around her, pushing everyone away. With a smirk, she stated that she finally understood. She then looked at him and declared that he was the first-generation hunter, the mad dog, Min Siwoo, the one who had gone missing 10 years ago. Siwoo asked if she was also from Pandemonium. Laughing, she denied it and explained that their organization was nothing more than an assassin guild, and that killers were just tools. She then admitted that her guess had been based on how quickly he had identified Pandemonium and his overwhelming strength. Additionally, she had once heard stories from his sister about a first-generation hunter with bizarre healing abilities. Siwoo simply asked if she truly knew nothing, warning her that if she lied, he would know immediately. Crow assured him that she was telling the truth, and added that since he had already figured out some things about her, her answer should be enough. However, she then remarked that it was strange how she had completely forgotten about his existence until now, though it wasn't her problem. Snapping her fingers once again, she casually ordered Porcupine to get up. To everyone's shock, Porcupine came back to life. Crow then caused an explosion in the ceiling and flew upward with Porcupine. Before leaving, she turned to Siwoo and asked if he planned to chase them. He remained calm and replied that there was no need. He had already gotten what he needed. Smiling, she waved goodbye while opening a portal, telling him they would meet again soon. Hamin, still watching, asked if they were really just going to let them go. Siwoo explained that if they had given chase, the floor's self-destruct system would have been triggered, and none of them were in any condition to avoid it. He then stated that they had achieved their goal, which was enough for now, and that they needed to clean up. Turning to Junggu, he asked if he was right in assuming he would handle it. Left with no choice, Junggu teared up before reluctantly agreeing. Siwoo then approached Black Mamba's corpse, his thoughts drifting to Pandemonium. He wondered just what the hell Minjun had uncovered. The next day, in Minjun's house, Siwoo sat at his desk, searching for information on Pandemonium. 20 years ago, the first gate had opened on Earth, unleashing all sorts of things into the world. It became the source of all power: mana, monsters, magic stones, and demons. Among them was a race from another dimension, naturally adept at mana manipulation and highly specialized in skills, much like awakened beings. Taking advantage of the chaos caused by the first gate, they seamlessly infiltrated Earth. Not only did they claim control over the gates as self-proclaimed overseers of the higher dimension, but they also treated humanity as an inferior species. As civilization collapsed under the pressure of mana surges and monster invasions, these beings established their headquarters, the Demon King's castle, right in the center of the continent, monopolizing every gate that appeared across the world. Soon, they began acting as if they were the rightful rulers of Earth. Amidst this turmoil, a despicable faction emerged: humans who worshipped the Demon King. They became known as Pandemonium. Fortunately, their tyranny did not last long. The first-generation hunters, having mastered mana manipulation, fought back. With humanity emerging victorious in the war against the demons, the chaos was finally put to rest. Siwoo knew that 10 years ago, he had defeated the 4 great demon kings before being plunged into the dimensional rift. By then, Pandemonium had already been disbanded. Yet now, they had resurfaced. Calling Pri, Siwoo asked if he was correct in assuming that demons existed in the other dimension as well, though they looked slightly different. Pri confirmed this and added that of all the races he had encountered, demons had the greatest influence across multiple dimensions. Siwoo recalled that, in that world, demons had enslaved dragons and ruled over various subspecies, exploiting them. He then asked Prey if he was right in thinking that demons acted like ruthless tyrants no matter where they went. Prey hesitated, saying he couldn't say for certain. However, he admitted that he still couldn't recall his memories from before he met Siwoo in that other world. The only thing that remained was a strong feeling that the demons had stolen something from him. After encountering demons for over 100 years in that world, Prey concluded that it was safe to say they truly were a tyrannical race. Siwoo sighed, saying it wasn't enough information. He remembered that 10 years ago, he had been too focused on killing demons to care about their origins. In that other world, he had only encountered their minions while struggling to survive. Still, he was certain that demon mana patterns differed from human ones, though over the past decade they had gotten significantly better at mimicking humans. Pri dismissed his concerns, telling him there was no need to overthink it. He should just kill every last one of them. Siwoo turned off his computer using his foot and replied that if only it were that simple, he would. At that moment, someone entered the room, commenting that Siwoo was back early. Siwoo turned to see Sejun, who reminded him that he had suddenly asked him to rent an office. Curious, Sejun asked what it was all about, and what kind of trouble he had gotten into this time. Siwoo casually replied that it was nothing much. He had just tracked down some traces of Minjun. However, Sejun immediately brought up what Jonggu had told him, stating that Siwoo had wiped out an entire hunter assassination guild. The revelation left him speechless. Sejun then questioned whether the office was meant to gather certain people and asked who Siwoo had brought in that he wanted to keep hidden from other guilds and associations. He reminded Siwoo that he had warned him repeatedly that they couldn't afford to stand out right now. If Daesu caught wind of this, he was done for. Siwoo, pouting slightly, muttered that Jonggu was such a loudmouth. He then reassured Sejun not to worry, explaining that Jonggu had erased all traces of his involvement. As for Daesu, he was already planning to meet him in person soon. Sejun was shocked by the idea. Siwoo explained that there were simply too many things on his mind, and if he confronted Daesu directly, Daesu wouldn't be able to make any unnecessary moves. Still concerned, Sejun asked if he was right in assuming that Siwoo wasn't fully recovered yet. He admitted that he couldn't stop him, but at the very least, he urged him not to be reckless. Siwoo approached Sejun as he spoke, telling him that 10 years had passed and the world had changed a lot. If he got into trouble again, Sejun wouldn't be able to save him this time. Grabbing Sejun from behind, Siwoo patted his head, assuring him that he could handle himself. He then teasingly asked why Sejun was worrying so much. Annoyed, Sejun shouted at him to stop, making Siwoo smirk as he jokingly asked if Sejun was actually trying to fight back now. Sejun agreed but reminded him to keep his promise, pointing out that he had agreed to train their guild's rookie hunters in exchange for the office space. He then asked if Siwoo remembered Jisoo, the hunter, and mentioned that Jisoo's awakening skill had turned out to be quite unusual and tricky. It would be great if Siwoo could check it out. Uninterested, Siwoo agreed and then changed the subject, saying they should eat now because he was starving. Sejun, surprised, asked if he was right in thinking that Siwoo had already eaten dinner and if he was some kind of black hole. Pri then chimed in, saying that he was hungry too and demanded to be fed. He added that Siwoo's pathetic mana wouldn't be enough, so he should bring him some chicken. Siwoo, exasperated, muttered that he felt like all this hunger was entirely Pri's fault. Before the conversation could continue, his phone rang. Seeing that it was Junggu, he answered. The moment the call connected, Junggu shouted, demanding to know why Siwoo had left his name out of the incident. Annoyed, Siwoo asked why he was yelling, if he hadn't already snitched everything to his brother, and if he had some kind of death wish. Junggu, ignoring his irritation, insisted that wasn't the point, and asked if Siwoo even realized how big the case was. He explained that it was the first time a professional hunter assassination group had been exposed, and with HMCS taking them down single-handedly, every news outlet and agency was now swarming them with interview and cooperation requests. He added that ever since the Gut incident, Gunho had been keeping a close eye on their team, and because Siwoo had left his name out, he was now the only one left in the clear. Siwoo asked if that wasn't a good thing, pointing out that Junggu was getting all the credit. Junggu, almost in tears, told him that it was far beyond just getting credit. He asked how he was supposed to explain taking down that many killers alone. Siwoo simply ordered him to coordinate his story with White Lion since Haman was from that guild. Junggu admitted that he had already tried, but White Lion's guildmaster, Sungil, was something else entirely. Crying, Junggu said he understood that the Imperial Guildmaster wanted to protect Siwoo, but given the previous prison break incident, it would be better if Siwoo stepped in himself. Siwoo agreed but told Junggu that he was eating right now. Wishing him good luck, he casually told him they would talk tomorrow. Junggu screamed in frustration, calling his name, but Siwoo simply hung up. Stepping out of his office, Siwoo sat down on the sofa. From the kitchen, where he was cooking, Sejun asked if it was Junggu on the phone. Siwoo confirmed it was and added that Junggu had said he loved his job and was so happy. He then looked at Sejun and asked how the demons had been behaving lately, and if they were the same as 10 years ago. Sejun shook his head and explained that after the 4 great demon kings disappeared, the demons had actually proposed a peace treaty. Since then, they had stationed themselves in the polar continent, establishing institutions to study the mana that had seeped into the earth. He added that the demons hadn't caused any major incidents since, and that some nations even collaborated with them on research. Apparently, it was now extremely rare for demons to leave the polar continent, and they had been out of sight for so long that some kids nowadays thought demons were nothing more than urban legends. Siwoo was irritated upon hearing that the demons had actually submitted a peace treaty. Pri shouted that it sounded like a joke and that it was ridiculous for demons to be talking about peace. Siwoo felt the same, but he also knew that there were trashy humans too, and that not all demons were the same. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had noticed that Crow used demon-like mana patterns, yet something about them felt different. It made him wonder if Crow was a half-blood between a demon and a human. However, he quickly dismissed the thought. Demons had only appeared on Earth 20 years ago, making it impossible. Picking up their group photo, he reflected on everything that had led to this moment. What had started as a mission to avenge Minjun had become something much bigger. As he followed Minjun's trail, he had the unsettling feeling that this fight would last far longer than he had ever expected. Later, Ghost, Volk, and Haman gathered in his office. Siwoo ordered them to circulate the mana in their bodies and focus, but at the same time, they needed to be aware of their Dantian. Haman, confused, asked what a Dantian was. Even after hearing the explanation, he admitted that it didn't really resonate with him. He questioned whether skill awakening wasn't something that just burst out when adrenaline was pumping. No matter how much he sat down and meditated, it didn't seem to improve his output at all. Instead, he asked if it wouldn't be better to just move his body intensely. Siwoo, clearly irritated, hit Volk on the head as he noticed him dozing off. He reminded them that they had begged him to train them, yet now that he had finally agreed, this was how they acted. He then asked if they seriously thought skill was like sweat, something that would leave them groggy after a single drop. Frustrated, he questioned whether people these days just threw mana around with no sense of control. Volk then asked if all this complicated training was really necessary, arguing that if a single strike was overwhelmingly strong, wasn't that enough? Siwoo scoffed and asked if they thought this was some kind of tutorial tower. Since they had first awakened their skills in an artificial gate, they were completely mistaken. He proceeded to lecture them, explaining that the power they gained depended entirely on how they burned their fuel, mana. The difference between controlled and uncontrolled mana usage was like night and day. However, since they hadn't even mastered the basics of mana circulation, they had only been using their skills by accident. That was why they couldn't feel their dantian or whatever else they were struggling with. Deciding to explain it once and for all, he instructed them to listen carefully. He explained that when a human first resonated with mana, a storage space opened inside their body called the dantian. The power generated from the mana circulating within the dantian was then awakened and manifested externally according to an individual's traits. However, the density of a skill depended on how efficiently one could control the mana stored in the dantian. To demonstrate, he released his mana, rolling it around the tip of his finger. He continued, explaining that through training, the dantian could expand, allowing a person to store even more mana. At an even higher level, additional dantians could open within the body. However, in their case, humans had only been exposed to mana for about 20 years. Since it was still an unknown power, understanding its essence was even more important. Hamin, intrigued, released his mana and stared at it. Siwoo then told them that meditation-based mana control training was the best method for understanding it, so they needed to stop talking and focus. Pri, watching the scene unfold, mocked Siwoo, saying that he was acting all knowledgeable now despite struggling for 100 years. Siwoo ignored him and instead turned back to his disciples. He warned them that starting the next day, he would push their bodies to the verge of death with physical training, so they shouldn't worry about anything else. Turning to Voke and Ghost, he made it clear that just because they were on a leash, they shouldn't think they would get off easy. Until they paid for their crimes, they would be trained to death. Both of them stuttered out a reluctant agreement. At that moment, Junggu entered the room, saying he had known Siwoo would be there. He also pointed out that Siwoo hadn't been answering his phone. Exhausted, Junggu asked if Siwoo had any idea how long he had been looking for him. Siwoo casually replied that it was because Junggu called him at all hours, then teasingly asked if he was some kind of stalker. Junggu was too shocked by the answer to respond properly, and instead told him that he needed to come to headquarters immediately. The branch manager was calling for him. A moment later, they arrived at HMCS headquarters and saw employees gathered outside. Siwoo turned to Junggu, asking why the branch manager wanted to see him and if Junggu had used his name. Junggu reassured him that there was no way he would do that. He wasn't entirely sure of the reason, but he suspected it might be related to the Incheon prison corruption transport case from before. Before they could continue, two men appeared in front of them. One of them addressed Junggu, asking if he was team leader Huang. HMCS Gangnam team leader Sung Changwon, accompanied by his deputy, Ha Juntae, remarked that he had heard Junggu had pulled off something big. While they had been away on business, the once-forgotten desk job gangbook team had suddenly become the talk of the town. Changwon then asked Junggu what kind of magic he had pulled off. Seeing Changwon already back from his business trip, Junggu was visibly irritated. He snapped that if Changwon was back, he should just return to his seat and work quietly. He then demanded to know why Changwon was picking fights with random people. Changwon, unfazed, simply replied that it was just a friendly greeting. He then smirked and asked why Junggu was being so sensitive, and if the man behind him was the rumored rookie. Changwon turned to Siwoo and remarked that he had heard about the major incident at Incheon prison. He added that the gangbuk team really had a knack for picking up guys like him. Teasing further, Changwon noted that Junggu, as his team leader, certainly had great taste. Siwoo remained silent, merely scratching his ear. Annoyed, Junggu told Changwon that was enough and asked if he was jet-lagged and just talking nonsense. Juntae interjected, reminding Junggu that their business trip had only been to Japan, so there was no reason for jet lag. Changwon then teasingly told Juntae to imagine how frustrating it must be for the gangbuk team. They had never even stepped outside the country, while the Gangnam team traveled the world in glory. Meanwhile, the gangbuk team was stuck pulling all-nighters and even failing to catch a runaway convict. Junggu's frustration grew, but Siwoo remained indifferent, casually looking at his phone. Juntae then turned to Siwoo, calling him rookie, and asked if he was just rude or if he had no basic manners. He reminded Siwoo that even though they were from different teams, they were still his seniors, and at the very least, he should introduce himself. Siwoo, instead of responding directly, mimicked Juntae's motion of adjusting his glasses. With a smirk, he asked Juntae and his sweaty senior to step aside, pointing out that they were clogging the hallway with their bloated muscle and excess water weight. He then asked Juntae if he even wore glasses for their actual purpose. Juntae and Changwon were visibly irritated, but after a moment Juntae let out a laugh and told Changwon that he would personally handle the rookie's education. Junggu, exasperated, asked Juntae if he had no brain and reminded him that they were in headquarters. He told them to learn to separate business from personal matters. Changwon, now angered, demanded to know what kind of nonsense Junggu was spewing. He asked Junggu if he was deaf if he hadn't heard what the rookie had just said. Junggu, keeping a straight face, replied that he hadn't heard anything and turned to Siwoo, asking if he had said something. Siwoo, without hesitation, answered no. He then suggested that maybe Changwon's ears were too clogged with fat to hear properly. Changwon, now fuming, declared that the two of them were out of their minds. He then asked if he should carve the truth into their thick skulls right then and there, pointing out that plenty of headquarters staff were watching. He wanted to make it clear who the real powerhouse was. Before he could act, someone grabbed Changwon's shoulder and apologized, stating that he was the real powerhouse there. Changwon turned around, and his face instantly paled in shock. Standing behind him was HMCS branch manager Baek Gunho. Changwon and Jontae immediately greeted their superior. Gunho turned to Siwoo and remarked that he had been wondering what was taking so long, only to find out that Siwoo had been held up there. He then scolded Junggu, telling him that he should have handled it and arrived faster. Junggu quickly apologized. Gunho then dragged Siwoo away, asking if he liked pu'er tea. He mentioned that since they had a special guest, he had prepared something nice. Changwon tried to stop him, calling out to Gunho and attempting to explain the situation. However, Gunho remained calm and instead addressed Changwon directly. He stated that he had recently heard rumors about how, during Changwon's trip to Japan, he had demanded extra entertainment outside of official duties. He advised Changwon that if he truly wanted to be a powerhouse, he should focus on his work first and stop wasting time on nonsense. Changwon, defeated, could only reply with a reluctant yes. As Gunho and Siwoo walked away, Changwon turned to Juntae and asked who the hell that rookie was and what kind of backing he had for the branch manager to go out of his way like this. Juntae, still baffled, admitted that he had no idea either. Once inside the branch manager's office, Gunho remarked that this was their first face-to-face meeting. Since Siwoo had been busy ever since he joined, there hadn't been a proper chance until now. Siwoo calmly acknowledged this and then got straight to the point, asking Gunho why he had called him in. Junggu, sitting nearby, began sweating nervously. Gunho, however, only laughed, saying that he liked how straightforward Siwoo was. He then revealed that the reason for calling him in was to ask a few questions about the Incheon prison transport mission. Junggu's nervousness only grew. Gunho continued, explaining that due to the Bestia incident, the investigation had now been transferred to their jurisdiction. While the Incheon prison corruption case was being handled separately, they couldn't just ignore the case of the escaped prisoner. He then asked Siwoo to explain. Gunho pointed out that it was hard to believe that someone capable of defeating Gut from the Red Light Guild could have simply lost track of a fugitive. He then asked if Siwoo was sure he didn't know anything about the escapee's whereabouts. Siwoo took a sip of his tea, remaining calm while Junggu continued sweating profusely beside him. Gunho then ordered Junggu to step outside for a moment. Without hesitation, Junggu responded with a nervous yes, and left the office, apologetically glancing at Siwoo as he closed the door behind him. With Junggu gone, Gunho turned to Siwoo and assured him that he wasn't an inflexible person. He mentioned that he had known Junggu for a long time and believed he was a competent man. However, it was hard to believe that Junggu had single-handedly investigated and destroyed an assassination organization. Gunho then stated that the destruction of the hunter assassination group Bestia and the escaped convict were surely connected. He reasoned that Siwoo must have picked up some kind of lead while on the escort mission. As he knew, that case was a significant achievement. Gunho went on to say that if the escapee had provided any information on the organization itself, there might be room for leniency. However, regardless of the circumstances, they couldn't simply turn a blind eye to an awakened criminal who was on the Hunter Investigation Bureau's wanted list. More importantly, with a mysterious rookie like Siwoo involved, the situation had become even more delicate. Gunho then revealed that he had sought advice from someone he knew regarding the situation. Interestingly, that person seemed to know Siwoo quite well, so much so that he was very eager to meet him. Gunho had therefore invited him to the office. Siwoo, hearing someone approaching from behind, asked Gunho who he was talking about. Gunho replied that the guest was one of the legendary first-generation hunters and one of South Korea's 3 lords, the warrior king, guild leader Do Kyung-hoo. Later, Kyung-hoo poured him a drink while asking how many years it had been. He admitted that even when Gunho told him about it, he still couldn't believe it. He was sure he had died. However, he simply replied that a lot had happened and remarked that Kyung-hoo had aged a lot in the meantime. Pri then asked him who the old guy acting so friendly with him was, to which he replied that Kyung-hoo was practically his comrade in arms. Kyung-hoo then told him that it wasn't that he had aged, it was that he alone had managed to escape the passage of time. It had been 10 years since he disappeared, yet he had returned without a single wrinkle on his face. Kyung-hoo then asked where the hell he had been hiding all this time, and if he knew how desperately his disciples had been searching for him. But instead of answering, he simply asked Kyung-hoo if they should order another drink, saying that it looked like they had a lot to talk about. Hours passed, and night had fallen by the time he finished telling his story. Kyung-hoo admitted that, at this point, such stories didn't even surprise him anymore, but he still couldn't fathom how much time had passed for him. He agreed and told Kyung-hoo that the moment he killed the Fourth Realm's Demon King, a dimensional spell had been activated. He wasn't sure whether it was the Demon King's final skill or the power of an artifact. Kyung-hoo then told him that the Fourth Demon King was still alive, shocking him. Furious, he slammed his fist on the table, demanding to know why humans and demons had signed a peace treaty if the Demon King was still alive. He angrily asked if everyone had lost their minds and if they were truly trusting those bastards with peace. Kyung-hoo told him to calm down and listen. He explained that technically, saying the Fourth Realm's Demon King was alive wasn't entirely accurate. At this point, he was little more than a pile of corpse fragments. Back when he was still on Earth, the war between humans and demons had been raging for years, deepening the conflict between the two sides. However, after he had defeated the Fourth Realm's Demon King and disappeared, the demons had immediately proposed a peace treaty, claiming that the war had been solely the Demon King's intent and not the will of their entire race. But he didn't believe it. He told Kyung-hoo that it was more likely they had simply felt threatened after their leader was taken down. Kyung-hoo agreed but pointed out that the humans weren't in great shape either. Ever since the first gate had appeared, monstrous attacks had made even basic survival difficult, let alone maintaining communication. Kyung-hoo added that they had barely managed to close the gate, but half-baked awakeners had run wild, law and order had crumbled, and then the war with the demons had pushed everyone to their limits. In the midst of that chaos, the demons had been the ones to propose a peace treaty first, offering to help nations recover from the damage while also teaching them how to close the gates, an extraordinary offer. In exchange, they had requested the remains of the Demon King, whose power had been exhausted, as well as a designated territory in the polar regions where they could stay until they found a way to return to their dimension. At a time when gates and mana were still unfamiliar concepts, most people had believed that restoring peace and adapting to this new power was the best path forward for humanity. In the end, the proposal had been accepted, and the top-ranked hunters from each nation had gathered and agreed to the treaty. At the time, the hunter who represented South Korea in signing the agreement was Dae-soo. Since then, the demons had strictly remained within their designated territory in the polar regions, only emerging to provide support when necessary, and they hadn't caused any problems at all. Some first-generation hunters had remained skeptical of the demon's proposal and opposed it, but with him, the core of the human-demon war, gone, everyone had eventually scattered. Now that communication had been restored and the world was more stable, public interest in the demons had faded. Kyung-hoo then finished by saying that even he hadn't doubted them since, but now that he had returned, something about all of it felt off. He asked Kyung-hoo what he meant, to which Kyung-hoo replied that it was his existence. His name had been completely erased from all records over the past 10 years, and there were even widespread rumors among the first-generation hunters that Dae-soo had been involved in covering it up. Kyung-hoo added that his records had been so thoroughly removed that most second-generation hunters had no idea who he was or what he had accomplished. Even Kyung-hoo himself had barely been able to recall his face, until he saw him today. Kyung-hoo also tells him that they fought countless battles together as two of the three lords, and now that he thinks about it, being forgotten in just 10 years doesn't feel natural. He asks Kyung-hoo if he is suggesting that Dae-soo made some kind of additional deal with the demons. Kyung-hoo responds that it is likely because Dae-soo would have done anything to defeat him back then. Curses the shady demons in anger while considering the possibility that Dae-soo colluded with them just to erase his existence. He wonders why that proud bastard would go to such lengths. He then asks Kyung-hoo what the demons would even gain from erasing him, even if it were true, and remarks that a simple grudge over killing their demon king doesn't seem like a strong enough reason. Kyung-hoo reminds him that the demons haven't made a single move since and, if anything, have helped humanity adapt to mana, so for now, there is no clear reason to accuse them. Still, he angrily tells Kyung-hoo that the demons consider themselves the superior race across all dimensions. If only they hadn't acted like arrogant overlords, they might not have ended up at war in the first place. Kyung-hoo is left speechless. Kyung-hoo then tells him that his disciples probably know more about what happened back then and asks why he doesn't go meet them. He replies that it is easier said than done since they all scattered long ago. Kyung-hoo acknowledges this, saying that it is always that way with students. Once they grow up, they go their own way. He then asks if Kang Yo-hwa is still in Korea. Kyung-hoo continues, saying that Yo-hwa was just a greenhorn 10 years ago but is now an S-rank hunter leading the Azure Blossom Guild. He remembers how she used to follow him around like a puppy, but now she is under Dae-soo's command. Kyung-hoo notes that 10 years is long enough for even mountains to change, and Yo-hwa must have had her reasons. He simply drinks his alcohol and remains silent. After a moment, he mutters that the drink tastes awful. Kyung-hoo teasingly tells him that while he may have avoided aging, his taste buds are now like a child's, and that the drink he just insulted is actually extremely expensive. Kyung-hoo then seems to remember something and mentions that they should have called Sejun too, since it has been ages and they could have caught up over drinks. He disagrees, saying that Sejun would flip out just knowing they had met. He adds that Sejun has become so overprotective now that he hasn't even noticed someone outside taking a photo of them. The man who takes the photo quickly calls his leader to report that he has just sent it. He confirms that the man in the picture is meeting Kyung-hoo privately at HMCS headquarters. The leader acknowledges receiving it and orders him to return immediately. Yo-hwa then opens the photo her subordinate has sent and confirms it with her own eyes. It is really Min Si-woo. He is alive. She thinks about the recent strange movements from the Empire Guild and the uproar in the tutorial tower. Although she had a feeling, she still cannot believe it. Si-woo has really and truly returned. Collapsing to the ground, she cries her heart out for her master. Sejun has never shared any information with her after she sided with Dae-soo, but keeping a tail on Kyung-hoo has turned out to be the right choice. Even when the entire world insisted that Si-woo was gone for good, she could never bring herself to give up. She searched every corner of the world, yet she couldn't find him. And now, he has suddenly appeared in Korea, completely unharmed. Wiping her tears, she stands up, realizing she cannot waste any more time. She needs to see him immediately. Just as she is about to leave, a voice calls her from behind. She freezes, turning to see Desu standing there. Forcing composure, she greets him respectfully, but Desu dismisses the formality and tells her to call him uncle when they are alone. He then asks where she is rushing off to. Trembling slightly, she replies that it is nothing. Desu places a firm hand on her shoulder, gripping it tightly. He observes that it has been a long time since he has seen that expression on her face. Even when her mother died, she had remained cold as ice, but now she is visibly shaken. His voice darkens as he states that the rumors must be true. The mad dog has returned, causing Yowa to feel a chill run down her spine. Desu sighed, realizing that this was why Yowa was ready to run off like a puppy that had found its owner. He patted her head and told her that she was still as naive and foolish as ever. He then reminded her that even if he had discarded that bloodline, she was still his only niece and his sister's only daughter. He asked if she really thought he would let her go so easily. Yowa slapped his hand away and angrily told him not to be mistaken just because she had come to him on her own. From the very beginning, all she had wanted was to find her master. Desu remained calm and asked if she truly believed he didn't already know that. He told her that he was well aware she had approached him because she suspected his involvement in Siwoo's disappearance. He revealed that he had taken her in, knowing full well that she would pretend to follow his orders while secretly digging into his confidential matters. His reason was simple. She had grown into a hunter with decent skills, making her useful to him. The realization both shocked and enraged her even more. Desu then told her that, in the current world, every single hunter was a valuable asset. He asked if she thought he would simply hand over a skilled worker, especially one of his own blood, to that mad dog. Furious, she shouted at him not to make her laugh and demanded to know what right he had after abandoning her when she was at her lowest. She then declared that she had never once considered him family, and that, from the beginning, the one who had raised her was her master. Desu agreed, and then told her that Siwoo had raised her without ever knowing she was the daughter of a vicious criminal. She froze at his words. As he walked past her, he told her not to be foolish and reminded her that she had seen firsthand how merciless Siwoo was to criminals. He then asked how she thought Siwoo would react if he learned the full truth about her past. Desu added that no matter how much she pretended to be noble, her roots would never change. He left, leaving her trembling with anger as she cursed him under her breath. The next day, at the Empire Guild, Jisoo met with the man who had treated her injuries. She mentioned that she had heard from Sejun that he would be personally leading the joint training session, and asked if the people beside him would also be participating. She pointed at Ghost and Volk, who were inside the mascot costume. He replied that they were his juniors, and he figured it would be good for everyone to train together, so they could think of them as their seniors. This confused the others as they glanced at Volk, who was visibly uncomfortable from the heat inside the costume. They bowed in greeting, and Jisoo introduced herself as a rookie. The man introduced himself as Kim Byung-guk. They then turned their attention to Ghost, noting that they had never seen a hunter that old before, yet his aura was no joke. Ghost smiled warmly and greeted them, then told Jisoo that she was a mature young girl with a sharp mind, and that he was sure she would learn quickly. Excited, she agreed and promised to do her best. Siwoo then turned to Volk and reminded him that even though it was called training, for them, it was nothing more than community service. He warned him that if they messed around, they would die. Volk, feeling pressured, asked if his mana oath had been for nothing and reminded Siwoo that his own head was on the line if he slacked off. Siwoo simply asked who didn't already know that and clarified that he was just telling him to take it seriously, as if they were paying for a crime. Volk groaned and said he understood, begging him to stop with the terrifying aura. Siwoo then walked toward the Empire Guild property, heading for Gate F5's entrance, and told everyone to follow. Jisoo admitted that she was nervous since this was her first time entering a gate since the tutorial tower due to her unique skill. Siwoo reassured her, telling her that there was no need to be nervous since a gate was simply a portal that connected dimensions. It was just a door, nothing more. Byung-guk, however, pointed out that there were cases where hunters had gone missing inside when gates closed, and people often said they had been eaten by the gate. Siwoo scoffed, questioning what they meant by eaten when it was just a door closing. Ghost chimed in, saying that it was actually a good way to put it. He explained that at this point, humanity was practically holding the key to those doors, and the fact that guilds now privately owned gates was proof of that. He added that what was once considered a disaster had now become a profitable business. Magic stones, monster cores, and even monster carcasses were all worth money. He warned them that if they let fear control them from the start, they wouldn't gain anything. With that, they stepped through the gate and were transported into a dungeon. Jisoo immediately felt nauseous and asked if this was what they called gate sickness. Meanwhile, Byung-guk noticed something unusual. Unlike the tutorial tower, there weren't any monsters at the entrance. He tells Volk that anyone would think this was a field trip and asks if all kids these days treat it that way. He then mentions hearing about a hunter academy and questions what they even teach there. Volk replies that, as someone from the first generation, it might not make sense to him, but for the 1.5 generation and beyond, gate raiding has essentially become just another profession with a structured curriculum. He explains that trainees go through the tutorial tower step by step, obtain their rank, and then get scouted by guilds based on their value. Only after joining a guild do they learn actual combat. He asks Voke if they consider taking down a few dozen monsters in an F-rank gate to be real combat, then comments that it looks like they are just churning out weaklings who would be wiped out in a real crisis. He then calls the rookies and orders them to demonstrate their skills before they get serious. They immediately reply in agreement and begin to showcase their abilities. Meanwhile, Byung-guk, observing the situation, reflects that he is only following the guildmaster's orders and wonders who Siwoo even is, bringing in outsiders and acting like he runs the place. He also questions why he is stuck in a training squad with weaklings, especially one who can't even properly manifest her skill. At that moment, Jisoo finally manages to release her skill and excitedly announces that she is done. However, her power unexpectedly rebounds toward her. Fortunately, she reacts in time and jumps away to avoid the backlash. Siwoo calls her over, and she quickly apologizes, but he dismisses her apology and throws something at her. Catching it, she realizes it is a whip. He explains that it is an auxiliary tool for spellcasting, and that the more complex and intricate her spell patterns are, the more effective it will be. He then tells her that he has heard a little about her skill from Sejun, so she should try using the whip as a medium and attempt casting again. She acknowledges his advice and begins channeling her skill into the whip. While she is focused on her spell, Byung-guk hears something approaching and turns to see a horde of goblins gathering at the top of a cliff. Before he can react, Siwoo casually sits down and orders Byung-guk to handle them. Shocked, Byung-guk asks why it has to be him. Siwoo simply reminds him that he is the one training, so he should be the one to take them down. He asks if Byung-guk really thought he would do it for him, then warns him to try not to die. Frustrated but left with no choice, Byung-guk activates his skill and prepares to fight off the goblins as they leap toward him. Ghost, watching from the sidelines, notes that Byung-guk's skill is a tracking type ability, which is tricky to handle. At best, he estimates Byung-guk's skill to be B+ rank. Pre comments that Byung-guk's skill doesn't look very useful, pointing out that it has flashy effects but lacks impact. Ghost agrees, adding that if Byung-guk keeps burning through his mana at this rate, he will run dry in no time. Meanwhile, Byung-guk is struggling against the swarm of goblins. Although goblins are generally considered easy monsters, he questions why a rookie is being forced to take on a horde alone and wonders what kind of reckless training this is. Frustrated, Byung-guk shouts at Jisoo, asking if she is done yet. She hurriedly responds that she is almost there. Before she can finish, one of the goblins manages to knock Byung-guk to the ground, sending him crashing onto his back. With his mana nearly exhausted, he watches in horror as a goblin charges at him, its axe raised to strike. He screams in fear. Just in time, Jisoo completes her spell and activates her Beast Tamer skill. The spell takes hold of the goblin, and the creature suddenly freezes in place before kneeling to the ground. Byung-guk collapses in shock as Jisoo excitedly orders the goblin to step back, which it obediently does. Overwhelmed with joy, she exclaims that she did it and eagerly asks Siwoo how it was, revealing that her skill is a tamer ability. Volk, surprised by the revelation, remarks that control-type skills are extremely rare. Ghost agrees, noting that even with the aid of an auxiliary tool, her skill itself is high rank with strong growth potential. Pri, growing excited, exclaims that there is finally something worth eating and declares that he wants it. He then adds that they already made a deal, so they should just take it now. Siwoo, however, ignores him and instead turns to Jisoo, questioning what she plans to do with just one controlled monster. At that moment, she notices goblins rushing toward her and quickly runs to Byung-guk, shaking him in an attempt to wake him up. She frantically shouts that they are coming and pleads for someone to help her. Later, back at the Empire Guild, Jisoo thanks him for today. With an exhausted expression, she tells him that, thanks to him, she thinks she now has a better understanding of how to use her skills. Volk looks at her tired face and remarks that half of it is already gone. He then asks if she plans to walk home and tells her that he doesn't care if she can't, suggesting she asks Sejun to introduce her to another mentor. However, she shakes her head and disagrees. She explains that she truly means it. Before, she had been a bit conceited. She thought that simply awakening a skill made someone special, and that the higher the grade, the more valuable a person became. But today, she painfully realized that skills are just tools and a means to an end, not a reflection of who she is. No matter how good a sword is, its true value depends on how well it is wielded. She adds that she now understands how crucial it is to train and adapt to mana itself. He tells her that if she gained anything from the experience, that's enough. He encourages her to keep working hard, and if she needs help, to seek it from that bear or the old man. Then, he suddenly notices an increase in people around them and asks if they are from another guild. Jisoo replies that she heard there is an ongoing negotiation with the Azure Blossom Guild regarding stakes in a recently discovered gate in the Middle Eastern desert, and that it seems the dispatch team has arrived. Just then, he notices someone from the Azure Blossom Guild. He then walks past her. Meanwhile, one of Yohwa's subordinates reports to her that, according to findings, the newly discovered gate is different from ordinary ones. When they and the Empire Guild first explored it, they found the corpses of the initial hunter group inside. However, unlike usual cases where hunters are killed by monsters, their bodies were intact on the outside while their internal organs had ruptured. Yohwa is confused, noting that unless something was physically placed inside them, there should be no reason for such a phenomenon. Suddenly, someone calls out to Yohwa, saying that they finally meet. She turns around and sees that it is Siwoo. Siwoo tells her that her master has returned, yet she isn't even going to greet him. She is speechless at first, but then shyly acknowledges that he has returned. He asks if she has time right now, but she apologizes, explaining that she has something to attend to and will be leaving first. Without another word, she turns and walks away, with her subordinates following in confusion. Pre teases Siwoo, saying that he just got rejected at the speed of light, and mockingly asks if he needs some comforting. Ghost comments that Yohwa is an ill-mannered girl and asks if she was his old disciple. Siwoo confirms that she was, but then quietly asks if Yohwa was crying. Years ago, he had found Yohwa crying in the corner. Noticing her hiding and sobbing again, he asked why she was crying like that and if something big had happened. She shouted at him to go away, but he simply sat next to her and asked if she was really that upset over losing a sparring match. He noted that she and Sejun were about the same age and questioned why she always had to cry in hiding when people would find out anyway. Reaching out, he stroked her hair, but she immediately pushed his hand away. She told him that since Sejun was his biological younger brother, it was obvious that he trained Sejun better than her. She bitterly remarked that she was just someone he picked up off the streets, and while she should be grateful for that, she would appreciate it if he didn't meddle in unnecessary matters. She acknowledged that he was strong and had a big heart, but reminded him that he wasn't even her real brother. In response, he simply grabbed her head and stroked her hair again, making her sigh in defeat. He then told her that the world was already terrible enough. So why couldn't he at least choose his own family? He then tells her that he will consider her his little sister, so she should just think of him as her big brother. He asks if that would make her feel less sad, but she shyly replies no, and questions who even asked for that in the first place. He chuckles and tells her that even when he is nice to her, she remains cold, then asks if she wants extra hard training tomorrow and if she would like him to make her cry twice as much. She scoffs and replies that it's not like he doesn't already do that every day. Yohwa reflects on that moment, remembering that she had spoken those words half out of embarrassment, but the other half had been sincere. She didn't want to be Siwoo's younger sister or simply his greatest disciple. She had wanted to stand shoulder to shoulder with him as an equal, to be a comrade strong enough to support the world he envisioned. Along the way, she had even dared to hold feelings she knew she shouldn't have. She thinks of herself as the child of a terrible criminal. Even if she had been abandoned, she had still grown up with the money they stole. To her, those feelings were never meant for someone like her. Frustrated, she recalls Daesu's words and convinces herself that Siwoo should never be involved with someone like her. But even so, she refuses to sit back and do nothing. If she cannot stand proudly beside him, then at the very least, she will fight for him from the shadows, to the very end, for the man who gave her a new life. Sejun is shocked when he sees her, immediately recognizing who she is. Snapping back to reality, he realizes that she is the Azure Blossom Guildmaster and asks why she is there when the meeting is still far off. But she simply calls his name and asks him to spare her a moment, saying that it is important. Meanwhile, in Daesu's office, Kyung-hoo tells Daesu that it's not that he doesn't trust him. He recalls how, ever since the first gate appeared, the three lords have been at the forefront of the battle against demons. During those lawless days, when criminals drunk on newfound power ran rampant, they fought to uphold humanity's dignity. Because of that, he won't turn on his comrades. However, if Daesu truly struck a deal with the demons for the sake of rebuilding human civilization and restoring the nation, then that is something else entirely. Daesu simply tells Kyung-hoo that there is no need to beat around the bush. He already knows that Kyung-hoo met Siwoo and asks if Siwoo called him suspicious. He then remarks that even a mad dog like Siwoo grows cautious after 10 years, adding that he himself is no different. He tells Kyung-hoo that everyone misunderstands him. What he seeks isn't a country or humanity's well-being. Such ideals are laughable. Daesu states that the title of Three Lords is a joke. What he truly desires is supremacy, an endless craving for power. He then asks Kyung-hoo if they shouldn't push their limits and see what lies beyond, considering that humanity has been gifted the overwhelming force of mana. To him, defeating countless strong opponents and striving for even greater power has always been his only goal. Power is merely a tool for that journey. No matter what deals were made with the demons, it was simply a matter of aligning interests. Interests that allowed him to stand where he is now. For the sake of rapid national recovery and the safety of its citizens, the leaders of every nation, without exception, joined hands with the demons. Whatever their ulterior motives may have been, in just 10 years, humanity has not only recovered, but advanced beyond its former civilization. Daesu then reminds Kyung-hoo that back then, even he must have seen negotiation as the best course of action. He asks if Kyung-hoo now intends to hold him accountable, leaving Kyung-hoo momentarily speechless. After regaining his composure, Kyung-hoo finally asks if Daesu truly made a deal with the demons concerning Siwoo, and if he was involved in Siwoo's disappearance and the erasure of his records. Daesu scoffs, calling the idea ridiculous, and states that he has nothing to hide. If Siwoo has returned, then that just means he finally has the chance to crush him once and for all. He then offers Kyung-hoo a three-way confrontation if that's what he wants. Before Daesu can say more, he suddenly hears Siwoo's voice commenting that this actually works out perfectly. Shocked, Daesu immediately turns around and sees Siwoo floating in the air. Siwoo tells him that he has a few questions of his own, adding that it has been a long time since they last saw each other. He aimed his palm at the window, shattering it into pieces with a burst of lightning. Despite the dramatic entrance, Daesu smiled broadly upon seeing him. Stepping inside the building, he remarked that Daesu lived in such a high place, but coming through the front gate was a hassle with all the procedures. He decided to get straight to the point before Daesu's annoying bodyguards could gather. He asked Daesu directly if he had teamed up with Pandemonium and sent him to another world 10 years ago. Daesu, unfazed, teased him, asking if that was all he had to say after such a flashy entrance and mocking him for having become boring. Frustrated, he threatened to flip the entire building upside down and called Daesu One Eye, demanding he answer the question. Daesu laughed loudly, commenting that his arrogant attitude hadn't changed a bit. He noted that 10 years had passed, yet there wasn't a single crack on his face, suggesting he must have had an enjoyable trip to another world. Daesu then asked what was so unfair that he had to break the window to barge in. Suddenly, he hurled a pot of plants at Daesu, scratching his cheek. Angrily, he asked if he should rip Daesu apart and scatter his limbs across different dimensions. He warned Daesu that if he valued his life, he should answer the question. He repeated his demand, asking if Daesu had ever teamed up with the garbage organization Pandemonium or had any involvement in young Minjun's death. He furiously warned Daesu that if he messed with Yeonhwa or his disciples, he would be finished. Daesu, however, only smirked and burst into laughter, shouting that this was more like it. He had missed the bloodthirsty battlefield vibe he brought. Daesu then released his aura, explaining that while he had been taking it easy in another world, Daesu had been using his position to fight strong hunters from around the world and grow stronger. He confidently declared that the killing intent of an old rival no longer fazed him. It wasn't enough to make his blood boil as it should. Daesu unleashed his dark power, teasingly asking if he was still someone who could burn hot enough to make risking their lives worthwhile. In response, he simply asked if he needed to punch another hole in Daesu's mouth to get an answer. Just as they were about to attack each other, Kyung-hoo intervened, stopping them in time. He shouted at them to calm down and think about where they were and the gravity of the situation. Kyung-hoo reminded Daesu that he was an SS rank hunter and a representative of the nation. Starting a fight in a civilian area was unacceptable. He asked if Daesu understood the weight of his position. Turning to him, Kyung-hoo reminded him that even though he was currently with HMCS and his safety was guaranteed by the Empire Guild, this wasn't like the lawless days of the past. A fight between hunters would attract too much public attention. Kyung-hoo warned him that if he didn't want his brothers branded as part of a guild that attacked the government, he should stop. This reasoning calmed him down slightly. Daesu too settled down, though he remarked that everything felt as boring as ever. He reminisced about the old days when they could fight and kill without restraint, always baring their teeth at each other and battling for dominance whenever they had the chance. Daesu then asked him if he also thought it was a dull era. He admitted that since he had made his blood boil, even if just for a moment, he would answer one thing. Daesu assured him that he had nothing to do with young Minjun's death, and that Yeonhwa had come to him of her own will. Teasingly, Daesu asked if it was really his fault if his disciples turned out poorly. With that, Daesu turned around and walked away, telling him that if he had more questions, he should come find him properly next time. Daesu promised to prepare a place where he could go wild as much as he wanted. He remained silent, and Kyung-hoo sighed in relief, glad he had successfully stopped the clash between the two powerhouses. A moment later, the elevator stopped on the 8th floor, and Daesu stepped out. A guard nervously reported that they had detected unusual sounds from the upper floors, but Daesu cut him off, reminding him that he had already told them there was no one on the continent strong enough to threaten his safety. He ordered the guard to leave it alone. The guard bowed and apologized immediately. Daesu then instructed the guard to contact the Immeasurable Legion, prepare an A-rank gate, and bring Yeonhwa to him. 7 hours earlier, Sejun had been watching a video on his computer when Yeonhwa entered. He asked her what it was about. She reminded him of the recently discovered gate they had found together and informed him that several hunter corpses had been discovered around it. The autopsy revealed that all their internal organs had ruptured at a cellular level. Yeonhwa speculated that the hunters had either fought someone with a specific skill or ingested something toxic. However, the real issue was that all the hunters were connected to a mysterious trade guild called IZ. She explained that IZ operated near the newly discovered gate and was so low profile that she had never heard of it before. There was barely any data on IZ, but rumors suggested that the guild's leader was a demon. This surprised Sejun, and he asked where she had heard such rumors. Yeonhwa replied that working close to the government meant hearing a lot of things. She told him it was up to him whether he believed it or not, as she would be handling the matter independently. She turned to leave, adding that they were definitely making moves and she would update him as soon as she learned more. As she walked away, Yeonhwa informed him that Daesu was keeping an eye on their guild, so Sejun shouldn't contact her unless she reached out first. Sejun stopped her and asked why she was doing all this, but she simply told him to keep it a secret from her master and that she wasn't planning to return. This confirmed Sejun's suspicion that Yeonhwa hadn't stayed under Daesu for 10 years without a reason. He sat back down, wondering why she was acting this way now. Even if she had joined Daesu to search for traces of Siwoo, now that Siwoo was back, her behavior didn't make sense. Sijun knew Siwoo trusted his 3 direct disciples completely, but to him, they all seemed burdened by their own secrets. He couldn't bring himself to trust any of them fully. Frustrated, Sijun held his head and called out Yeonhwa and Xiaolong's names, asking aloud what they were thinking. Suddenly, Siwoo arrived, having overheard his question. Siwoo asked what was going on with Yeonhwa, causing Sijun to stand up in shock. Siwoo pressed him, asking if Yeonhwa had said something and firmly telling him not to hide it. He demanded to know if something had happened to Yeonhwa. Meanwhile, outside, Yeonhwa was preparing to leave when one of her members approached and apologized for interrupting. The member reported that Dae-soo had urgently summoned her. Yeonhwa cursed under her breath but responded that she understood and was on her way. 10 years ago, shortly after Siwoo's disappearance, Dae-soo was speaking with a demon. He asked if the demon wanted his cooperation in erasing all memories of Min Siwoo. Hikatan, a subordinate demon of the Second Lord of Calamity, agreed. He explained that Siwoo was the only individual who had pushed the 4 Lords of Calamity to the brink of death. To maintain control over demons with strong autonomy, the Demon Lord's authority had to remain absolute. A humiliating record of the Demon Lord nearly losing to a human would pose a dire threat to their rule. Hikatan added that while the war was over, it was still a time of chaos. Upholding their agreement and maintaining order among demons would benefit both sides. Dae-soo responded that the proposal was absurd. Just because they had accepted the terms of the treaty, the demons seemed to have forgotten one crucial fact. The war had ended with humanity's victory. He questioned why they should even consider helping demons who were now exiled to the polar regions under the agreement to rebuild the damage. Hikatan, however, countered that they had been observing Dae-soo for some time. They knew that deep down, he must regret that the war had ended. Hikatan pointed out that Dae-soo had discovered a new power with limitless potential, but the time when he could wield it freely, without laws or restrictions, had come to an end. He told Dae-soo not to bother pretending otherwise, as the truth was that he simply wanted to fight stronger opponents. Hikatan assured him that they could help him reach the pinnacle of Mana's ultimate form. Dae-soo was momentarily speechless. He asked if the demons would go that far just to erase the fact that their lord had lost. Eventually, he accepted Hikatan's proposal but questioned whether they had considered that if he became stronger, he would pose an even greater threat to the demons. Hikatan explained that unlike humans, whose lives were fleeting, demons had much longer lifespans. Their perspectives were vastly different, and their goal was simply to uncover the true nature of mana and the dimensional gates. With that, Hikatan turned and walked away, telling Dae-soo they would wait for his favorable response and calling him the strongest hunter in Korea. In the present, Dae-soo was inside an F-rank gate owned by the Infinite Number Guild, waiting for his guard to report. The guard informed him that they had secured an empty gate with no search value, as requested. The guard added that the gate belonged to the Infinite Number Guild under Dae-soo's ownership, and public access had been restricted. They confirmed that no living entities remained inside. Dae-soo praised the guard for doing well, and asked if the invitation had been sent properly. The guard confirmed and reminded him about the summit meeting the next day. Dae-soo curtly replied that he was aware and told the guard not to make him repeat himself. Suddenly, someone entered the gate. It was Yeonhwa, who angrily reminded Dae-soo that he had told her to go on a business trip. She demanded to know why he had gone through the trouble of summoning her there. Dae-soo signaled his guard to leave, warning Yeonhwa to be careful with her words when others were around. As the guard exited, Yeonhwa asked Dae-soo what this was all about. Dae-soo revealed that he knew she likely suspected him of playing a crucial role in Siwoo's disappearance. He admitted that at the time, he had neither accepted nor cooperated with the demon's proposal. However, even though he was aware that Siwoo was gradually being erased from existence, he had done nothing. Whether Siwoo disappeared or not hadn't been his concern. Yeonhwa was furious and demanded to know what kind of nonsense he was spouting. Dae-soo released a small amount of power from his hand and calmly explained that the reason his actions back then now felt uncomfortable was because that incident had ultimately given him power. He had thought about it and simply wanted confirmation. Between Siwoo and himself, he was the stronger one. Dae-soo unleashed his power at Yeonhwa, but she managed to dodge just before it struck her head. She bent down, activating her own power, and demanded to know if Dae-soo even realized what he was saying. She asked what he meant by the demon's proposal. As the pieces fell into place, she clenched her teeth in fury, realizing that Dae-soo had been behind Siwoo's disappearance and the erasure of his records. Overwhelmed by anger, she released all her power and attempted to kick Dae-soo's head, but he effortlessly blocked her attack. Dae-soo tightened his grip on her leg and dragged her down, coldly remarking that she was just like her mother. He listed her fiery temper, her willingness to cling to enemies for her own goals, and her inability to grasp the situation as traits she shared with her mother. With a brutal motion, he slammed her into the ground, shattering it into pieces. Severely injured, Yeonhwa could only listen as Dae-soo coldly told her that she was nothing more than a tool, a mere instrument to push Siwoo's fighting spirit to its limits. Dae-soo calmly held his neck and explained that the lingering inferiority he had carried like a shadow from the past had begun to fade after Siwoo's disappearance. Yet, it had stubbornly clung to him like an unwashed stain. Now that Siwoo had returned, it was time to rid himself of it completely. Yeonhwa, despite her injuries, laughed mockingly and asked if Dae-soo really thought Siwoo would entertain his sick little game just because of her. Dae-soo raised his foot and pressed it onto her shoulder, increasing the pressure as he spoke. He told her he was certain of his plan because in the past, when Siwoo had wasted his time playing house with a family, Daesu had doubted him. But now, after looking into Siwoo's eyes, he was convinced that Siwoo had left much behind in that other world over the past 10 years. Daesu pressed harder on her shoulder, telling her she didn't need to do anything except serve as the ignition point. He admitted he didn't know the details of Minjin's death, but vowed to make use of whatever cards he had. He then released a chain, wrapping it around her. He advised her to stop struggling, explaining that the shackles were crafted by the best artisans in the Black Abyss. Even an S-rank hunter like her wouldn't be able to break free easily. The shackles absorbed mana, he explained, and the more she resisted, the more they gnawed away at her energy center. If left unchecked, they would cripple her permanently. Daesu added that he didn't know how long his fight with Siwoo would take, but in the meantime, she could struggle all she wanted. It was her role. Yeonhwa, stuttering, asked if he really thought any of this would change anything. She shouted that he was still nothing but trash. Suddenly, she felt someone rushing forward. Siwoo appeared, attacking Daesu in a furious explosion of power. The force of the attack created a massive shockwave, but Daesu managed to block it. Excitedly, Daesu shouted that from this moment on, history would finally be written properly. He declared that the outdated hero of the past would die there, and the title of the strongest person in the land would belong to him. Siwoo, furious, called Daesu a lunatic. He cast a spell, hurling thunder at Daesu, but Daesu easily blocked it with a shield, laughing in excitement. Daesu teased him, shouting that his power felt so light and that the gap between them had grown deep over the past 10 years. Siwoo remained silent, his gaze briefly flickering to Yeonhwa, who was still chained behind him. Pri, watching worriedly, asked if Siwoo was okay. He reminded him that Daesu was a monster and that Siwoo's power output hadn't fully returned. But Siwoo simply replied that there was no time to worry about that. They would have to go at maximum output. Pri shouted at him, asking if he was crazy. It reminded him that his mana had barely recovered to half at best. Pri warned him that Daesu was stronger than any human it had ever encountered and expressed doubt about whether it could even absorb a skill of that scale while trapped in his weakened body. It added that using its limit could bring unknown side effects. However, he calmly responded that he only needed 50% of the power he had used in the other world, and that was more than enough. There was no problem at all. Daesu, who was effortlessly blocking his attacks, taunted him, asking what he was mumbling about, and if he was regretting barging in so confidently now. He unleashed even greater force toward Daesu, but Daesu blocked it again. Suddenly, he appeared in front of Daesu at incredible speed, declaring that for a bastard like Daesu, that much power was more than sufficient. He released an even stronger force, shattering the ground and causing debris to float in the air. Yet Daesu managed to block the attack once more. Meanwhile, Yeonhwa watched in disbelief. She was witnessing a battle between first-generation hunters, true awakeners. Their casting speed was so fast that even keeping up with the fight was difficult. She had always known there was a power gap, but she never expected the difference between S-rank and SS rank to be this vast. Daesu summoned a spear and gripped it tightly, laughing as he told Siwoo that it had been too long since he had felt such a sensation. With a powerful throw, he hurled the spear at Siwoo, shouting that it felt good to throw away all restraints and immerse himself in the essence of mana. Siwoo bent down and cast a spell, mocking Daesu for his unchanged habit of collecting toys and showing off even after 10 years. He created a massive wall as a shield, but Daesu's spear pierced through it, shattering the wall into pieces. Pri screamed, asking if Daesu was even human. Pri warned him that Daesu seemed capable of fighting on equal footing with a high-ranking demon and that the spear heading their way was no ordinary artifact. Siwoo responded that Daesu had always been a bit of a brute, but in the end, he was just a half-baked human. He caught the spear mid-air, surprising Daesu, who laughed and charged toward him at high speed. Daesu summoned a swarm of swords, grabbed them, and leaped at Siwoo, shouting at him not to blink. However, Siwoo managed to cast a shield just in time, blocking Daesu's advance. Daesu taunted him, asking if that was all it took to make him crack. He then summoned a massive metal hammer, calling Siwoo's shield pathetic, and repeatedly struck it, vowing to turn it into dust. Siwoo retaliated by casting a Frostfang spear, causing spikes of ice to form behind Daesu, ready to pierce him. Daesu, however, released a burst of power, shattering the ice spikes. He brushed off the remaining ice and remarked that, as expected, a true master never dies easily. Siwoo irritably told Daesu to stop talking and remove the shackles if he didn't want to die. Siwoo questioned Daesu, asking if Yeonhwa was truly meaningless to his goal and if he thought he could still maintain his position with the government after pulling such a petty stunt. Daesu disagreed, countering that Yeonhwa still held value and that her background as the daughter of a serial killer was enough to make her a useful pawn. Yeonhwa, shocked, shouted at Daesu to shut up, warning him that if he kept talking, it would be over for her. Suddenly, she felt a powerful aura emanating from Siwoo, who told her not to move as he released even greater power in his anger. Daesu, surprised and exhilarated, laughed and shouted that this was what he had wanted. His skin tingled with anticipation as he summoned a shield and sword, declaring that they should start fighting for real. But before he could act, Siwoo appeared in front of him in an instant and threw a punch. Daesu blocked it with his shield, but the force of the blow shattered the shield into pieces. Daesu realized that Siwoo's mana control and density had fundamentally changed. Daesu jumped back, summoning armor to cover his body. He noted that Siwoo's skill output regulation had changed, and asked if his cowardly fighting style had evolved over the past 10 years. Siwoo fired back, asking how Daesu could criticize his tactics when Daesu himself didn't even understand strategy. The two clashed repeatedly, attacking and blocking each other at blinding speed. Daesu admitted that he had been young back then and threw a dagger near Siwoo's feet. Daesu admits that from the last attack, he realized something. He then activates the trap, and chains appear beneath Siwoo, wrapping around his legs. Daesu then summoned an enormous sword, larger than before, and swung it towards Siwoo with all his might, shouting that Siwoo was no longer his equal. The force of the slash tore through the ground, causing a massive explosion. Yeonhwa, worried, called out to Siwoo, but her voice was drowned out by the chaos. Then, to her astonishment, she heard Siwoo calmly tell Daesu that he was right about one thing among all the nonsense he had spouted. They were not equals. Siwoo stood unharmed, simply holding the sword Daesu had swung at him. Siwoo tightly gripped the sword, making it impossible for Daesu to pull it back. Daesu knew the sword he was holding was a legendary artifact, a great sword capable of slicing through entire buildings. Yet, it didn't even budge in Siwoo's hands. Siwoo lifted the sword effortlessly and asked Daesu if he had really been fighting for 10 years. Then, with a swift motion, he punched Daesu in the side, declaring that he himself had been fighting for 100. The force of the punch sent Daesu flying, slamming him into the ground. Despite the blow, Daesu laughed, admitting that it was truly fun. He couldn't even remember the last time he had bled. Daesu stood up and asked if Siwoo had been holding back his mana for that one strike. He showed his watch, a regulator that restricted his power, and told Siwoo that if he was serious, he should respond with his full power as well. Siwoo threw the greatsword aside and channeled some of his power into his hand. Daesu explained that 5 years ago, all officially recognized SS rank hunters worldwide had been required to wear the bracelet. It restricted mana, physical abilities, and skills to prevent massive damage to society. Removing the regulator without government authorization would instantly brand them as criminals. Daesu then threw his watch away, freeing his stats from restriction. He sneered, calling the bracelet a dog collar, and mocking Daesu for being a beast that only knew how to fight. He asked if Daesu had climbed to his position just to get government approval for a dogfight. Daesu, visibly angered, told Siwoo that he was overestimating himself. With a smile, Daesu asked if Siwoo really thought that was the only reason he was there. He then unleashed his full power, his aura shattering the ground around him. Daesu shouted that there simply hadn't been anyone worth testing his power on. Until now. Siwoo calmly released his own aura, challenging Daesu to show him what he had. Their auras collided, creating a destructive force that tore through the surroundings. The sheer power of their clash caused the ground to crack and the gate to tremble. Yeonhwa stumbled as the entire gate shook. She realized that even the collision of their mana was enough to destabilize the area. At this rate, the gate would collapse, and innocent people could be harmed. Determined to stop the fight, she forced herself to break free from the chains binding her, knowing she had to intervene no matter what. Meanwhile, Siwoo and Daesu continued their battle at full power. They exchanged blows, each attack blocked or countered with precision. However, it was Daesu who struggled to keep up. He used his hammer to crack the ground, sending massive piles of rocks towards Siwoo. But Siwoo avoided the attack with a lightning flash, moving too quickly for Daesu to land a hit. Pri, watching from within Siwoo, remarked that its stomach felt queasy, but admitted that the power felt amazing. Even at half strength, Siwoo's full power was on another level entirely. This, Pri declared, was how skills should feel. The F-rank gate trembled as the overwhelming powers of Siwoo and Daesu continued to clash. Despite releasing his limits, Daesu struggled to keep up. He coughed up blood, realizing that even after removing his restrictions, the gap between them was still immense. Unable to accept this, Daesu summoned a swarm of swords, laughing maniacally as he cursed. He grabbed a dark weapon beside him and hurled it at Siwoo, ordering it to tear him apart. The weapon transformed into a monstrous tiger, biting down on Siwoo's arm. Siwoo recognized it as a monster sealed inside an artifact. Without hesitation, Siwoo cast a magic circle and ordered Pri to activate the tamer skill. Pri complied, and the tiger immediately turned on Daesu, recognizing Siwoo as its new master. Daesu, furious, called Siwoo a bastard and activated a new form of power, ready to continue the fight. But before they could clash again, Yeonhwa appeared, shouting at them to stop. She demanded if they had both lost their minds and told them to look around. The gate was on the verge of collapsing, and the sheer amount of magic spilling out could have catastrophic consequences if it reached the outside world. Yeonhwa warned Daesu that even he wouldn't be able to escape responsibility if that happened. She reminded him that an international tribunal would hold him accountable. Daesu called her an arrogant brat, but Yeonhwa stood her ground. She revealed that while Daesu had been losing control, she had contacted the Hunter Association and the HMCS headquarters. It wouldn't be long before they responded and reopened the gate. She urged them to end the fight now. As she walked closer to Siwoo, he remained silent, his expression unreadable. At that moment, Daesu's watch buzzed with an incoming call. He answered it, annoyed, and was met with the voice of Edward from the HMCS headquarters. Edward informed him that the matter was urgent and demanded his immediate attention. Dae-soo cursed under his breath but agreed to be there. Before leaving, Dae-soo turned and coldly remarked that this was why wild beasts should never be taken in. He declared that he had lost interest and told them to get lost. As Dae-soo walked out of the gate, Yeonhwa felt a wave of relief mixed with dread. She collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by the thought that Siwoo, the last person she ever wanted to find out about her family, now knew the truth. She had never wanted to betray the sincerity and kindness Siwoo had shown her, even if it meant dying to keep her secret. Tears welled up in her eyes as she wondered what she could even say to him now. How could she explain that the disciple he had fed, cared for, and trusted was actually the daughter of a criminal? As these thoughts raced through her mind, Siwoo approached her. He bent down beside her, his voice warm and gentle, asking if she was okay and if she was badly hurt. Yeonhwa was stunned by his kindness, even after everything that had happened. Overcome with emotion, she hugged him tightly, crying her heart out. Siwoo, ever calm, simply patted her back and teased her, saying she had way too much energy. A moment later, in Dae-soo's office, he confronted Edward during a video call. Dae-soo argued that he didn't understand why Edward was making such a big deal over the words of a single hunter. He reiterated that he hadn't broken any laws and pointed out that the hunter's overreaction had caused unnecessary confusion at HMCS headquarters, making the situation their fault. Dae-soo questioned whether it was excessive to take action over something as minor as light training within a closed gate. Facing Edward C. Blackwood, the vice president of HMCS International Headquarters, Dae-soo waited for a response. Edward calmly explained that the situation would have been different if Dae-soo hadn't removed his restraint bracelet. He reminded Dae-soo that SS-class hunters were strictly prohibited from engaging in personal battles, a rule that clearly angered Dae-soo. Edward further informed him that any lifting of such restrictions had to be reported to the Hunter Association or HMCS. Using magic power against an HMCS-affiliated hunter warranted an investigation, and given Dae-soo's status as a national leader, he could even face international court. Even if no violations occurred in his home country, there were sufficient grounds for issues under international law. However, Edward added with a smile, in these peaceful times, there was no need to create unnecessary social chaos over a minor incident. He sincerely requested that Dae-soo handle the matter himself in Korea. Edward stood up and explained that even if they decided to let the matter slide, they still needed to hear from all parties involved to fully understand the situation. This meant they would need to meet the man Dae-soo had clashed with. Dae-soo, suspicious, asked if Edward was finally targeting Siwoo. Edward simply replied that he would see Dae-soo in Korea before ending the call. Dae-soo was left seething with embarrassment, feeling it was a disgrace. He reflected on the past, recalling how a decade ago, he had felt the difference in strength between himself and Siwoo. Back then, the gap hadn't been too severe. He had been close enough to reach Siwoo's level. Dae-soo had been certain that this time, he would surpass him. But over the 10 years Siwoo had been absent, Siwoo had grown exponentially stronger, as if he had become an entirely different being. Dae-soo couldn't believe the overwhelming gap between them now. He wondered what Siwoo had been doing all that time and how long it had been since he last felt the thrill of fighting without restraint. Sitting down, Dae-soo realized that the strength he had gained while bound by chains wasn't enough. After all this time, he finally had a goal worth breaking free for again. With a mix of frustration and determination, Dae-soo welcomed the return of the mad dog, Siwoo. 1 week later at the Azure Blossom Guild headquarters, Siwoo questioned Yeonhwa about her absence. He asked why she hadn't come to greet him, knowing he was there, even if the reason was trivial. Yeonhwa shyly admitted she had no excuses and said that for her, it was enough just knowing he had returned. Siwoo sighed in frustration and asked if she had managed to uncover anything about Minjun during his absence. The question startled her. Yeonhwa apologized, explaining that she hadn't found anything. She clarified that it was clear no one in the country was involved, and that Dae-soo only kept her around for his own benefit. She added that she hadn't found any evidence suggesting Dae-soo was scheming against his siblings or disciples. Panicking, she insisted that her assessment wasn't influenced by Dae-soo being her blood relative. It was purely based on circumstantial evidence and her observations so far. Siwoo simply responded that he understood and patted her head gently. He reassured her that if Dae-soo truly saw her as family, he wouldn't have done such disgraceful things to her. Yeonhwa smiled and told him she was fine now because he had already healed everything. However, he explained that it wasn't about whether she was fine or not. It was about freeing herself from that pathetic bloodline. Whether her mother was a criminal or not, she had lived her own life and hadn't done anything wrong. He encouraged her, saying that if she still felt guilty, she should live proudly and give back to the world, promising to help her along the way. His words reminded her of the old times, and she laughed, tears welling up in her eyes. She smiled warmly at him and said she had never truly been alone because she always had people like him supporting her. Wiping her tears, she admitted she felt bad for Sejun, realizing she had made him worry unnecessarily all this time. From Sejun's perspective, it must have been difficult to trust someone like her, who hid so much. He scratched his head and told her that Sejun was a cautious person, so she should make things right when she saw him tomorrow. Yeonhwa was shocked and asked what he meant by tomorrow, especially since things were still awkward between her and Sejun. He simply asked what the problem was, emphasizing that they were both adults. He assured her he had already spoken to Sejun and added that, while he didn't know how Dae-soo had handled things, at least it hadn't turned into a huge mess. Checking his phone, he noticed Sejun's message and chuckled, thinking Sejun's intuition was something else. However, he also saw 9 missed calls from HMCS. Suddenly, Jong-gu appeared, prompting him to ask why he had come all the way there when he had said he was leaving right after his business trip. Jong-gu shouted that it was urgent and scolded him for not answering his phone, asking if he had any idea how long he had been searching for him. Just then, Gunho arrived as well, and informed him that he had received a call from HMCS International Headquarters. Edward was coming to Korea to meet him in person. Gunho asked if he knew anything about it, but he only responded with a question of his own. Did Edwin find out? He was visibly annoyed upon hearing the news. When he asked if Edwin had given a reason for the visit, Gunho explained that there was a gag order over the entire branch regarding the matter, so no details were available. Jong-gu, puzzled, wondered aloud if Siwoo actually knew the vice president of the headquarters. Gunho added that Edwin had specifically mentioned Siwoo's name, so he assumed Siwoo must know what was going on. He also noted that this was the first time something like this had happened in the history of the HMCS Korean branch. Gunho pressed him for answers, but Siwoo apologized, explaining that if there was a gag order, there was nothing he could say at the moment. Gunho accepted this and informed him that the headquarters would contact him once they had a fixed schedule, so he should wait for now. As Gunho dragged Jong-gu away, he whispered for Jong-gu to figure out what was happening, whether by buttering up Siwoo or using all his connections. Gunho also whispered questions about Yeonhwa's relationship with Dae-soo and why she and Siwoo were sitting together so comfortably. Jong-gu simply replied that he had no idea. Yeonhwa noticed the HMCS members whispering and told Siwoo he should head back, as there would be a lot of eyes on him for a while. A few minutes later, they were walking down the street when he asked Yeonhwa why she suddenly wanted to see him off. She replied that his grace was like heaven and that she was on her way home from work anyway. He then asked what she planned to do from now on. She responded that if he was okay with it, she would follow his lead. She also admitted she found it hard to accept Minjun's suspicious death and assured him she would do whatever she could to help. Despite appearances, she reminded him, she was a proper guild leader. Their conversation was interrupted when a black car with tinted windows stopped in front of them. Siwoo was visibly irritated, but Yeonhwa stopped him from approaching, recognizing the car. Someone inside rolled down the window and remarked that even after learning everything, they had chosen to back down, calling them no fun. When the window fully lowered, they saw it was Dae-soo. Dae-soo told him to get inside the car, which immediately angered Yeonhwa. She demanded to know what kind of nonsense Dae-soo wanted after pulling his earlier stunt. However, Siwoo calmly asked Dae-soo why he should follow him. Dae-soo responded that if they wanted to keep up their pathetic master-disciple act, they should listen carefully. Yeonhwa, furious, asked if Dae-soo thought this was a joke, but Siwoo stopped her, telling her that this was as far as she should go. He assured her he would be in touch and walked toward the car, opening the door and getting inside. The car drove off, leaving Yeonhwa alone on the street. On the road, inside the car, Siwoo told Dae-soo he had some nerve and asked if he wasn't embarrassed after getting beaten like a dog. Dae-soo laughed, correcting him and reminding him that their fight hadn't been settled. If Yeonhwa hadn't interfered, Dae-soo claimed, he could have finished it for good. Dae-soo added that things had just gotten interesting because thanks to Siwoo, he would soon create a legitimate international stage for them to settle their score properly. Siwoo scoffed, telling Dae-soo to piss off and expressing disbelief that someone like him could be a president. Suddenly, Dae-soo brought up pandemonium out of nowhere, immediately grabbing Siwoo's attention. Dae-soo explained that while the world believed pandemonium was gone, remnants of the group still existed, scattered across the globe. He admitted that after Siwoo vanished 10 years ago, demons had reached out to him through their network, even asking for his help to erase any trace of Siwoo's existence. This meant pandemonium had been keeping an eye on Siwoo as well. Dae-soo asked if Siwoo thought pandemonium was just a cult dabbling in forbidden powers or the secret pawns of demons. Siwoo remained silent, so Dae-soo continued. After pandemonium fell and the demons were driven to the far north, most traces of them had vanished. Despite this, world leaders, including Dae-soo, had been closely monitoring any demon activity. However, there had been no significant clues, until recently. Dae-soo revealed that there were reports of a group of half-demons in the Middle Eastern desert. Siwoo asked if he had heard correctly. Half-demons? Dae-soo confirmed, explaining that these were humans who had prolonged contact with demons or children born from unions between demons and humans. Unlike full-blooded demons, they didn't have horns or wings, but they wielded black mana. Dae-soo added that this was all he had heard from government officials. He explained that the harsher the terrain, the higher the probability of high-level gates appearing, making it difficult for foreign forces to investigate. Dae-soo then asked Siwoo if he had sided with the demons during his 10 missing years, noting the black mana Siwoo had used in their battle. Siwoo firmly denied it, but Dae-soo teased him, reminding him that he used to loathe demons. Yet, when it came down to it, Dae-soo suggested, Siwoo was no different in his desperation for strength. Siwoo asked if Dae-soo really thought he was like that and ordered him to pull over if he was done talking. The car came to a stop at the side of the road, and he stepped out. Before walking away, he made it clear that Dae-soo should not misunderstand his intentions. He explained that he had no interest in aligning with shady demons or indulging a battle-obsessed lunatic like Dae-soo. He advised Daesu to drop the act, but added that if Daesu ever felt like dying, he should call him. And while at it, Daesu should kneel and apologize to Yeonhwa. Daesu, though visibly irritated, smiled and responded that he understood Siwoo had his own quirks, but found it ridiculous to waste time caring about weaklings who could never hope to reach his level, even in 100 lifetimes. With that, Daesu closed the car door, warning that one day, Siwoo would regret his choices. The car drove off, leaving him alone to ponder the revelations about half-demons and Crow. The next day, at the HMCS building, the staff was bustling with activity, surprised to see representatives from the HMCS International Headquarters. Whispers filled the air as people speculated whether this was a routine inspection or something more significant. No one had any concrete answers. In the branch chief's office, Gunho thanked Edward for making the trip and introduced Siwoo as a new recruit with the HMCS Gangbook team. Edward greeted Siwoo with grace, but Siwoo casually questioned what kind of stunt this was, catching Gunho off guard. Gunho quickly reminded Siwoo of his position, but Edward intervened, requesting Gunho to step out and give them a moment alone. Gunho, though baffled, agreed, knowing that interfering might jeopardize his chance to build connections with someone from headquarters. He assured Edward he would wait outside and to call him if there were any issues. As he left, Gunho had no idea what was happening but decided to place his trust in Siwoo. Once Gunho and the others were gone, Edward lost his composure, calling Siwoo a bastard. As Edward grabbed his collar, demanding to know where he had been for the last 10 years. Siwoo asked Edward to calm down, and Edward eventually let go, muttering curses under his breath. Edward admitted that at least Siwoo had returned, but pressed him again about where he had been hiding all this time. Siwoo sighed, realizing he had no choice but to explain everything once more. He gestured for Edward to sit down first. A moment later, after Siwoo finished recounting his story, Edward acknowledged that the idea of another dimension and a different flow of time sounded far-fetched. However, considering the gates that had opened on Earth, it wasn't entirely impossible. Edward reflected on how Siwoo had once been a key figure in the world, but now his existence had faded into obscurity. Seeing Siwoo again made Edward feel as though the haze over his memories was finally lifting. Siwoo remarked that Edward seemed to remember him quickly, considering he had only just heard his name. Edward responded that he could never forget someone who had saved his life countless times during the chaotic days of the past. Siwoo found Edward's words a bit over the top and asked how he and Yeonhwa had even gotten in contact. Edward explained that HMCS headquarters was currently leading a joint investigation alongside various guilds worldwide, and Yeonhwa's guild was one of them. Yeonhwa had made a name for herself in a recent case, which was how Edward had obtained her contact information. Edward then asked Siwoo if he was currently at the HMCS Korea branch and offered him a position at HMCS headquarters. Siwoo declined, surprising Edward, who asked why he didn't want the opportunity. Siwoo simply replied that he saw no reason to. Edward urged him to reconsider, emphasizing that someone like Siwoo should be operating on a bigger stage. He added that he could really use a reliable right-hand man. Siwoo thanked him for the trust but explained that he was already conducting his own investigation. Edward agreed that headquarters could assist with that, highlighting the extensive investigative authority they had. Siwoo said he would think about it and asked what the joint investigation was about. Edward explained that a hunter group massacre had occurred inside and around a newly discovered gate in the desert. While people would normally assume it was caused by monsters, the autopsy revealed poisoning. The hunters had all died from ingesting something, and based on their findings, they suspected illegal enhancement drugs. Siwoo was visibly surprised by this revelation. He asked Edward if he was referring to an awakener drug. Edward confirmed and explained that there had been no official announcement yet, as they still lacked concrete details about the substance or its distribution network. However, in reality, the Central Bureau had been secretly investigating a series of awakened deaths occurring worldwide over the past 6 months. Edward informed him that autopsies during the investigation revealed only one common factor. The victims' internal organs had ruptured at the cellular level. The case was difficult to announce publicly because most of the victims were awakened criminals, and no traces of drugs were found in their systems. Fortunately, a witness had come forward in China regarding a similar incident. According to the witness, the deceased awakeners had inhaled a black powder before exhibiting berserk behavior and ultimately self-destructing. Those who inhaled the powder displayed unimaginable levels of mana release and skill enhancement, acting almost like living suicide weapons, wiping out everything around them before exploding. He asked Edward if this meant the black powder was an illegal awakener enhancement drug, and if it was linked to the recent desert incident. Edward clarified that it wasn't just linked, it was directly connected. The desert incident was considered the starting point of the illegal drug case. Confused, he asked why the desert incident, which happened recently, was considered the starting point when the investigation had been ongoing for 6 months. Edward explained that a gate had been discovered in the desert, accompanied by a massive number of casualties. At its entrance, the Azure Blossom Guild had been the first to secure the original form of the black powder. Near the gate, they also found a vehicle belonging to an obscure trade guild called IZ. Edward added that while the IZ Guild had no known illegal ties and appeared to be a small-scale operation, something about it felt off. He leaned back in his chair, lamenting why he always got tangled up in such messes and thinking it was going to be a hassle. Edward smiled and mentioned that he already knew Yeonhwa was his disciple. While the investigation was being conducted in secrecy, Yeonhwa, as the first to discover the drug's original form, couldn't back out of the case now. Edward added that if he helped, the trouble Yeonhwa faced would be significantly reduced. He questioned whether Siwoo would really ignore the situation, knowing his precious disciple was caught up in a dangerous case. Edward called him by his nickname seriously, making him realize that Edward had already set the board. Reluctantly, he agreed to help, partly because he had business in the Middle East as well. This lifted Edward's mood, and he excitedly promised to do whatever he could to assist if Siwoo was willing to lend his strength. Edward then asked what had happened between him and Dae-soo, mentioning that he knew about their unauthorized live combat training. He offered to help resolve the situation, but Siwoo declined, telling Edward to leave it alone. He explained that while Dae-soo was a power-hungry piece of trash, he was still human at the end of the day. The next day, at Sejun's house, Sejun noticed him packing and asked if he was joining the Central Bureau's international investigation. He confirmed, explaining that Edward had personally asked him for the favor. Sejun admitted he knew Edward but questioned how he had even gotten in touch with him. He replied that it was a long story and suggested Yeonhwa would explain the details later, which surprised Sejun. Before Sejun could ask why Yeonhwa was suddenly brought up, his phone rang. Sejun answered and walked away, asking Yeonhwa how she had even gotten his number. Pri, curious, asked where they were heading this time. He responded that their first destination was Europe, where the Central Bureau's headquarters was located. Pri asked if they had chicken there, and he guessed they probably did. Pri then questioned whether he would be pushing their mana to its limits like in the last battle, which caught him off guard. He playfully asked Pri why it mattered, and if Pri was worried about his food supply running out. Pri angrily retorted that it wasn't about the mana supply but rather an anomaly occurring within him. He asked what Pri meant, and Pri explained that ever since returning to Earth, as he grew more accustomed to Earth's mana and his output increased, he had noticed a loss of control. Pri speculated that dimensional travel had affected not just him, but Pri as well, and the fight where he had pushed his mana output to the limit had likely triggered the issue. Pri elaborated that since they had formed a contract in the other realm, Pri wouldn't attack him. However, the more his mana recovered, the worse the loss of control would become. Eventually, if Pri lost complete control, they couldn't predict what side effects might emerge. There was even a risk that he might not be able to use his power at a crucial moment. He thought for a moment and responded that he wasn't exactly relying on Pri's power much at the moment, so it didn't matter. This angered Pri, who asked if he was saying he didn't need Pri's power. He clarified that if they ended up fighting demons, he would need Pri's strength. But for now, it wasn't something to worry about too much. He stretched his body, reflecting that his warm-up fight with Dae-soo had ended up being useful. As he looked out the window at an airplane, his thoughts turned to the awakened enhancement drug, realizing it all felt too familiar. 2 days later, at the HMCS International Headquarters, a woman remarked to her team that Edward was truly something else. Despite the manpower shortage, she couldn't believe he was adding people to a classified international investigation without following proper procedures. Another woman chimed in, saying Edward had always been unpredictable like that. Hayakawa Hikari, the first investigation team captain of the HMCS Tokyo branch, confidently stated that she alone was enough for the Asia team. She asked her brother Kumo if he agreed, and Kumo immediately supported her, praising her as the youngest recruit in HMCS Japan's history, the first team captain of the Tokyo branch, and the most beautiful woman in the world. Hikari laughed and told Kumo to keep the compliments coming. Layla, the first investigation team captain of the HMCS Europe headquarters, interjected that even though Yeonhwa wasn't an official HMCS member, she'd honestly prefer working with that Korean hunter over Hikari. Hikari shouted, demanding to know what Layla had just said. Layla calmly replied that she had said nothing, but Hikari reminded her that they were both wearing translation earpieces, and if she had a complaint, she should say it outright. Suddenly, a man appeared, informing them that Director Leone had ordered everyone to assemble in the main conference hall. Hikari asked if the unprecedented parachute recruit had finally arrived. The man awkwardly laughed and told them to head over, as he had heard the recruit had just landed with Edward. Layla wondered who the hunter was, given that Edward had personally gone to greet him. She questioned if the recruit was even officially part of HMCS. The man confirmed that the recruit was from HMCS Korea, Hunter Min Siwoo. A moment later, everyone gathered in the meeting room. Edward thanked them for coming quickly despite their busy schedules and suggested they start with brief introductions. He introduced Siwoo as the newest official member of their team. Layla introduced herself and her team's vice president Stefan, representing the Europe branch. Hikari introduced herself and Kumo, her right hand from the Asia branch. Edward explained that since the case was urgent, they should get straight to the point. With a new member joining the team, they needed to revisit the details. He asked Layla to provide a brief summary of the case, to which she agreed and stood up. Before Layla began, Edward reminded everyone that although they were already familiar with the details, they should be extremely cautious about leaks, as this was a classified investigation. Suddenly, Edward's secretary knocked and informed him it was time for his next appointment. Edward stood up, expressing his confidence in their excellent work, and left the meeting room with his secretary. The room fell quiet until Layla cleared her throat and announced they should begin the briefing. She started by outlining case number A3942FC, also known as the illegal awakener enhancement drug case. Their investigation team was responsible for the field investigation at the site where the original substance was first discovered. The initial gate found at the site was ranked A. A total of 6 awakener corpses had been discovered near the gate, and autopsies confirmed they suffered internal damage identical to victims in previous incidents. The awakener enhancement drug was found among the victims' bodies. The gate itself showed traces of battle only near the entrance, with no unusual findings inside. Since no awakener enhancement drug was found within the gate, its level of danger was still being assessed. Once the investigation was complete, a decision would be made on whether to proceed with clearing the gate. Layla added that a vehicle belonging to the trade guild IZ had been found near the site. Upon investigation, IZ was identified as a small-scale legal guild operating in the Middle East with no notable irregularities. Therefore, their team would primarily focus on an in-depth investigation inside the gate and a thorough field inquiry around the site. After finishing her briefing, Layla asked if there were any questions. He mentioned that he had already heard the details, so he didn't have questions about the case itself. However, he asked if there was any information on demonic beings or half-demons. Layla was confused and asked if he was suggesting they were involved in the case. He clarified that he wasn't implying a direct connection, but thought it was worth asking just in case. He explained that if the drug was purely man-made, tracking its origin wouldn't have been so difficult. If it was created using skills, a tracking-type awakener would have detected it much earlier. This made the trade guild suspicious, and he wanted to know if there was any information about IZ Guild from past cases. Hikari interrupted, expressing her confusion and questioning why he was bringing up unrelated matters. He calmly responded that whether it was related or not could only be determined after investigating. He explained that he had brought it up because of some information he had come across. This further irritated Hikari, who arrogantly questioned how a mere hunter from the Korea branch, who had been inserted into the investigation midway, could know information that even the headquarters hadn't mentioned. She added that it was laughable. Hikari continued her tirade, questioning whether the headquarters would have already addressed the issue if it were truly an important clue. She pointed out that he wasn't part of the alliance, nor a known ranker hunter, making it ridiculous that someone like him had been parachuted into an international investigation. Now, he was suddenly claiming demonic beings might be involved, which only added to her frustration. Hikari angrily reminded him that humans and demonic beings had been in cooperative relations for over 10 years, and dragging outdated racial biases into the investigation was unacceptable. She demanded to know who he thought he was to make such claims. He remained silent, not responding to a single word. Layla shouted at Hikari to stop, and Stefan intervened, urging everyone to calm down. He emphasized that there was no need for hostility so early in the investigation. Layla agreed, reminding them that as top representatives from their respective branches, they should prioritize the case over personal conflicts. This calmed Hikari down slightly. Layla then asked him to focus on the investigation itself, to which he agreed, stating he understood. She moved on to outline the next day's operation in the desert area. Hours later, Layla finished briefing them and instructed everyone to be prepared for the day of departure. Layla, Stefan, Hikari, and Kumo left the meeting room. Hikari, still visibly upset, questioned who Siwoo was, where he had come from, and how he had gained the vice chairman's favor. Layla reminded Hikari that they would be working together for a while and advised against making a big deal out of it. Hikari was surprised and asked if Layla was on Siwoo's side. Layla clarified that she wasn't, but noted that Siwoo seemed more experienced than she had expected. Meanwhile, Siwoo remained in the meeting room, yawning and guessing that the investigation might turn out to be more annoying than he had anticipated. Pri remarked that it had been noticed before. Siwoo had no sense of social awareness and was a total outcast. Siwoo explained that he simply didn't care for formalities. Someone approached him, commenting that he had made quite the dramatic entrance. Siwoo noted that it had taken Edward long enough to show up and remarked that the vice chairman must be very busy. Edward sat down, describing the International Investigation Agency as more of a circus than anything else. He explained that while they called themselves Awakeners, they were essentially a bunch of lunatics running around with bombs in their hands. Nothing had changed in the past 10 years. Chaos was still everywhere. Siwoo stood up, reminding Edward that great power came with great responsibility, a phrase that was hard to understand unless experienced firsthand. He walked toward the front of the room as Edward asked how he found his team members. Siwoo glanced at the documents and replied that they were a little annoying, but he didn't care as long as they didn't get in his way. Edward smiled, noting that some things never changed. Siwoo was still the same as he had been 10 years ago. Edward reminded him that the next day's operation was just a routine site survey, so he shouldn't cause too much trouble. With the entire HMCS International Headquarters backing him, Edward expected things to go smoothly. Siwoo uninterestedly agreed. The next day, they arrived at the HMCS Middle Eastern Branch Headquarters where a man welcomed them. He informed them that their accommodations had been arranged at the main office building and that a vehicle had been prepared for their transportation to the incident site the following day. Layla thanked the branch director and inquired about the access permit for the gate at the incident site. Siwoo looked around while Pri complained about the heat, calling it the worst place on Earth. Siwoo noticed there were no traces of demons in the city, and the mana density was stable, making him wonder if Edward had sent them on a wild goose chase. Suddenly, Hikari called out to him. She warned him to stay sharp and focused if he didn't want to die, making him realize that this investigation was going to be far more annoying than he had thought. That's the end of the video. Let me know your thoughts, and if you want